Hi Harshil.
Hello, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine, sir. How are you, sir?
Good, good, good. Looking good, man.
Thank you, sir. I mean, it's a presentation. I had to be prepared, sir. So,
No, absolutely, absolutely. Are you all set?
yeah, definitely, sir.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to wait for everybody to
No,
come.
right, sir. I could just, I know, I have a habit of logging in early. So, in case anything happens, that's why I'm before time. So,
Yeah. We're also streaming this event live on YouTube.
okay,
So
sir. Okay.
yeah, that's the other thing. And wish you all the very best.
Thank you
Okay.
so
I
much,
hope you
sir.
do great. And I'll just be hosting it in the beginning and
Right, sir.
introducing people and everything. After
Right,
that,
sir.
we'll hand it over to the research cell.
So,
Okay.
just one thing. Will we
Uh,
be allowed to share screens as
yes,
participants?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You will be. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Once we have a certain number of people coming in, then we will start off with the program. So, think,
Right, sir.
right. Thanks.
Hello, Ashil.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
How are you doing? Good
Fine,
afternoon.
ma'am.
Okay, all the best.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Very good afternoon to everybody. We're just waiting for all the participants to join us, and they should be in very shortly. As soon as they're in, we will then start off with the proceedings for today. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. We'll just start. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry, there was an IT glitch on my side. Apologies to everybody.
No problem, sir. No problem. Yeah, Siddhartha, we can start. Yeah.
All right. I hope excuse me. I hope everybody can hear me clearly.
Yes.
All right. I would request everybody to turn on their cameras, please. All the participants in the audience that is here today, we all turn on our cameras. Great. Thank you. Right then. A very good afternoon, distinguished judges, members of ISBF faculty and management, participants, and students. Welcome to the second edition of the ISBF Research Paper Presentation Competition. The Indian School of Business and Finance, or ISBF, was founded in 2006 with the vision to bring world-class higher education to India in the fields of economics, management, finance, accounting, and business. And today, more than a decade and a half later, it gives us great pride in saying that we have succeeded to a great extent in doing so. As part of this endeavor, the research cell at ISBF was established in the year 2019 to introduce students to research objectives, methodologies, and tools, training the student body in relevant tools, including Excel and Stata, allowing for exposure to different fields of research and supporting original research through internal and external opportunities. The research cell is driven by a pool of faculties at ISBF who focus on helping students to hone their skills that will allow them to produce tangible research output towards the end of their academic year. In January 2021, the research cell at ISBF hosted the first edition of the Paper Presentation Competition, or the PPC, where students from prestigious institutions across India, as well as abroad, participated and submitted their research papers in the fields of economics, management, and finance. In its very first edition, more than 100 entries were received for the event, out of which 8 were shortlisted to exhibit their analysis to a jury, such as today, comprising of Professor Chetan Ghate, former member of the Reserve Bank of India's first Monetary Policy Committee and currently professor at Indian Statistical Institute, and very recently who has been appointed as the director of the Institute of Economic Growth, Dr. Sameer Kapoor, who is the author of When India Votes and currently on board of India's largest PR firm, AdFactors PR, and Dr. G.L. Dayal, who's Dean Academics at ISBF. And it is with great pride that we also say that students of ISBF, that is namely Siddharth Jamad and Yash Nitin Patel, were unanimously selected last year as the winners of the first edition of the paper presentation competition. Through this initiative, also, the ISBF Journal of Economics, Management and Finance was born and was published last year in October. It is currently available on the Research Cell page at the ISBF website. Now, today, we have with us our shortlisted presenters, along with an esteemed 3-member jury featuring Dr. Rakhi Singh, who has over 26 years of academic and administrative work experience across premier national universities and management institutes in the areas of managerial economics, global macroeconomy, international economics, entrepreneurship, small business and small and medium SME sector, innovation, family business management, and corporate social responsibility. Her research interest lies in the area of international business and macroeconomic policies. She is actively involved in teaching and guiding undergraduate and postgraduate students, training in institutional development, faculty development workshops, and mentoring them as well. Apart from currently, she is a freelance faculty in economics and entrepreneurship and teaches part-time as well as an adjunct faculty member at IBS Gurgaon. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us today. I'll just spotlight you. Right. Along with Dr. Rakhi Singh, we also have with us today Shri Tuhin Sen, who is an award-winning strategy professional with several years of experience developing, executing, and managing communication strategies and branding for both corporate and non-profit institutions such as Global Development Network, Saatchi and Saatchi, UNESCO, Low Lintas, Leo Burnett, among others. Shri Tuhin Sen, believes in effectively communicating the core value of a company in a way that inspires their audience to action and has a great understanding of how to translate business strategies into actionable programs and then motivate teams to achieve the set goals. His approach to communications is characterized by his collaborative leadership style and strong analytical skills. Currently, he is with the International Air Transport Association, also known as ITA, as their Assistant Director, External Affairs, India. We welcome you too as well, sir, and thank you for taking our time for joining us. And lastly, the third member of our esteemed jury panel is Dr. Girdhari Lal Teal, who is the Dean Academics at ISBF. Dr. Teal is a highly respected teacher of management with over 40 years of experience, both at the undergraduate and postgraduate level, and has penned several books and research articles in the field of management. He is also an advisor for textbook development and conducted in-service training for teachers at NCRT. He has been associated with several leading business schools and professional bodies in the country and has often been invited to deliver lectures on contemporary strategic issues in business. He is also a life member of the Indian Institute of Public Administration, IIPA, and his areas of research include strategic management, human resource management, global business, and organization theory and behavior. Thank you for joining us, sir, as always, and we welcome all our esteemed jury members today. Now, before we start off with the proceedings, I would quickly like to reiterate the rules of the competition, and I request all the participants to hear out these rules very clearly. Each team will get exactly 15 minutes to present their research in the form of a presentation, followed by 5 minutes for question and answers with our esteemed panel. Please note that the 15 minutes time should be strictly adhered to. Teams will be provided a notification via Zoom chat at the 10-minute mark saying 10 minutes are up. Okay, so please pay attention to that as well. Any team exceeding the limit of 15 minutes will be asked to stop immediately. All right. All team members, while presenting, must keep their cameras on. When one team member is speaking, other team members, along with the audience, must be on mute to avoid any sort of chaos or overlap. The mode of presentation should be clear, and one team member can take the onus of sharing the screen. It must be ensured that there is a backup ready in case of a power failure or any other technical issue, such as a network problem. Other team members in such situations must be ready to take over in such a case, and the onus for this lies entirely on the team, and otherwise the team will be disqualified. So please make sure that you have all your backups and your network in a good situation, right? So those are the rules. These were already sent to all the participants a few days back, and the jury members were also provided with their scoring sheets. So if you all are ready, I would like to now pass on the baton to Atika Gupta, who is one of the research cell members and is also been spearheading the paper presentation competition here at ISBF. So Atika, over to you. I'm going to spotlight you. So best of luck.
Yeah, thank you, Siddhartha. And I would like to welcome once again all the judges for taking out their precious time for this competition. And so I would like to call team 1, Ankit Kumar Singh, to please share their presentation with us.
Thanks, Atika. I would just share my screen.
Yeah.
It's saying that host has disabled the share screen option. So could you please?
Yeah, I'll just. Okay, Siddhartha, can you help out with this?
It has been enabled. So if you could try sharing now, it should work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right.
So is it visible now?
Yes, it is visible. Yeah.
So I would be talking about my research, which is on interstate variations and female labor force participation rate in rural India. So here I have gathered evidences from NSSO data to basically describe the various factors which are affecting female labor force participation in rural India. So just to start with, what is female labor force participation rate? ILO's definition about labor force participation rate says that it is like very rudimentary speaking, it is just the indication of the size of supply of labor, which is available for the production of goods and services related to the working population. So how do we calculate the female labor force participation rate? It is just the percentage of female in the labor force participation to the female working age population of a country. So the working age population would usually be more than 15 years. What's the rationale for studying female labor force participation? So there are different literature which says that it's important to study female labor force participation because it's an indicator of economic efficiency and for improving of potentials of a country's development. The female labor force participation in labor market helps in achieving gender equality, and various objectives of development could be studied better if we are also focusing on female labor force participation rate. It is seen as a driver and an outcome of development and indicates the economic and social well-being of female in a country. So economic growth and female labor force participation, the relationship between these two variables is represented in the form of a U-shaped curve. This U-shaped curve signifies the increase in economic growth. The female labor force participation will initially decline as the GDP growth rate would increase, and then it would reach its minimum and then subsequently rise. So Sherverick's seminal work on female labor force participation describes a correlation between female labor force rate for and economic growth to be higher for poor countries where women have to work in subsistence sector, and this kind of employment is mostly distress driven. And this would eventually fall for middle income countries where the transition is happening, where men are more needed in the industrial sector. And in the services sector, as the demand for labor grows, female re-enter the labor market from the agricultural sector. Eva Lichman calls this phenomena mutually conditioned, given other variables constant. Particularly in India, the primary role that was identified for women was to do with agricultural sector. This is particularly related to rural India. And these women in agricultural sector were mostly unpaid and were being controlled and guided by men. This has pushed women further below in the workforce and has socially tied them with their household activities. Arora's literature describes women's participation in casual labor as an unsustainable fashion, where women are paid less and are exploited more in basically form as long working hours and restricted from raising voices in their working platforms. World Bank data shows that female labor force participation was highest in 2005, which was around 31.79%. And as GDP subsequently increased from 1995 to 2005, the female labor force participation witnessed a decline by 34%. So this phenomena of increasing GDP but declining female labor force participation is what Makina in her paper calls puzzling. Other literature talks about an opposite effect of India witnessing over these periods where the GDP growth rate has been subsequently increasing and female labor force participation being persistently declining. If we compare male and female labor force participation rate in rural India, we see that male labor force participation rate is usually has not been affected that much over the year from 1987 to 2010. This is the period whose NSS data have been included. And female labor force participation has witnessed a subsequent decline from 2005. So the theory that I have used in this paper is Jacob Mincer's theory, which talks about the income effect being dominant, which talks about the substitution effect being dominant over the income effect in determining the female labor force participation rate. Overall, the female participation is positively related to the wage level. as wages will increase, there will be more female entering the job market in the rural India. The objectives of this paper is to ascertain different factors which are significant in determining the female labor force participation rate, to understand the relationship between wage level and female labor force participation rate from 1993 to 2010, and to test Jacob Mintz's theory of substitution effect, dominating income effect, in determining the female labor force participation rate. So some of the variables I have included. So basically I've categorized all the variables in 4 factors: household factor, personal factor, economic factor, and social factors. Under the household factors, there are 3 variables that I have talked about: female headed households, which is the number of female headed households in rural areas for different union territories and state. This particular variable, according to literature, shows a positive relationship. Average household size, the literature doesn't mention about the particular kind of relationship that this variable has with the female labor force participation. And IPOP, which is the number of people from the age group of 0 to 4 in the rural areas, and in different like across the different UTs and states in India. This variable shows a negative relationship, showing that if there are more people of the age group of 0 to 4 in rural areas, the female labor force participation rate will decline, because women are mostly given job like handling or care jobs of those number of people who are of the age group of 0 to 4. And personal factors, the variables like literacy rate, which is number of rural female who are not literate in different states and union territories. The relationship that this variable has is negative. PRIM, that is PRIM, MID, and SEC are the different variables explaining the number of female who are literate up to primary, middle, and secondary level. And literature talks about positive relationship with the female labor force participation rate. And the last personal factor is wage, which is again difficult to ascertain in determining the female labor force participation based on literature. This wage is generally the average daily wage for female in particularly the casual workers from the age group of 15 to 59 who are engaged in works other than public works in rural India. The economic factors are rate of women, and this factor is again difficult to ascertain to determine labor force participation rate. And land, which is said to have a negative relationship with female labor force participation rate. Social factors like sex ratio in rural areas has a positive relationship with female labor force participation rate. EMH, which is households in rural areas having at least one male member, has a negative relationship in female labor force participation. MUSP and STSP are the number of Muslims and scheduled castes and scheduled tribes population in states and UTs in India. MUSP is said to have a negative relationship, and STSP is said to have a positive relationship. This positive relationship in the number of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in determining the relationship with female labor force participation is because of the reservation factor. Now, there are different hypotheses that I want to test. The first hypothesis is in the relationship between wages and female labor force participation. So the null hypothesis is the substitution effect of wages dominate. This is again from the Jacob Mintz's theory. Alternate would be the income effect of wages dominating the substitution effect. So other 3 hypotheses is regarding average household size and female labor force participation. So there is something that exists like income dilution effect in households, which says that if women in large families contribute more, and hence average household size is positively related to female labor force participation rate. Unemployment and female labor force participation rate. So there exists a positive relationship between unemployment rate and women labor force participation rate. This is because of added worker effect holds true. This hypothesis is supported by the literature on which basically talks about distress-driven employment in rural India. And the last hypothesis is minorities and female labor force participation rate. So in this case, the minorities and the female labor force participation rate is positively related with their caste and religion variable because of the reservation policies. So I have ran a multivariate regression analysis for 4 data sets, NSSO 50, 55, 61, and 66. Here I've basically tried to see which are the variables describing which kind of relationship with female labor force participation. I'm mostly interested in seeing average household size, which is mostly negative. The IPOP, which was the number of people from the age 0 to 4, this describes a positive relationship, which is not very significant for 55 and 61 data, and a negative relationship in 66 data. Wages is again negative, although not very significant for 61 and 66 data. The land has described significant relationship, significant positive relationship with female labor force participation rate. Literacy is a negative relationship with female labor force participation rate, not very significant for 61 and 66 data. And so all these four models are showing decent R-square values, which means that they are able to all these variables are able to explain the model, are able to properly explain the model. Apart from this, I have also created a heteroscedasticity corrected test where I've included other variables which were not included in this model. So in that variable, in this test, I have included unemployment rate, sex ratio, MUSP, and STSP. So unemployment rate is largely negative for NSSO 66 data, and I've created different models based on NSSO 66 data to check basically the relationship between to check which are the variables which are significant and the relationship between those variables and female labor force participation rate. So unemployment, it's largely negative. Sex ratio is positive, but again, the values are not that high. And MUSP is negative and STSP is also negative. So the analysis and results, household factors, FHH shows a positive relationship in the literature as well as in the model. AHS, which was difficult to ascertain based on literature, has shown a negative relationship. This means that income dilution effect does not hold true, hence the null hypothesis is rejected. The personal factors, IPOP is negative, but in our model, it is positive, although it's not very significant. The factors related to education, ILLR, PRIM, MID, and SEC are negative. Our ILR is negative, and other variables are positive, and it's the same positive for our estimation results, except the SEC, which was a negative variable. And wages were a variable which was difficult to ascertain based on literature, which is negative based on our findings. This means that income effect dominates the substitution effect, which is against the Jacob-Minsels theory. Economic variable unemployment rate was difficult to ascertain based on literature, but the estimation shows that it's a negative relationship, which shows that there is a discouraged worker effect that holds true. So as more as the unemployment rate increases, women in labor force participation rate will withdraw. Land is negative relationship in literature, but the estimation shows a positive relationship with the female labor force participation rate. This particular point I haven't highlighted in this research because that was outside the purview of the study. The social factors of sex ratio shows a positive relationship in both the literature and our estimation. EMH again shows the negative relationship. MUSP shows a negative relationship based on literature as well as a negative relationship based on the estimation result. And STSCP shows a positive relationship based on literature, which talks about the reservation policy having a significant impact, which is negative, which means that the reservation policy doesn't have a significant impact, and hence the null hypothesis is rejected. So some of the policy recommendations that I am highlighting regarding this issue of continual decline and continual decline of female labor force participation.
Sorry, Ankit, I'll have to ask you to stop. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I would now request judges if they have any questions for Ankit.
Yeah, Ankit, just one question. Why have you taken the data from 9 till 9:10 only? Wasn't
Yeah,
it available?
Yeah, so NSSO's last data was till 2010, and then there is PLFS data available.
Okay. Yes, sir, please.
Okay, so I have a question. Am I audible?
Yeah, but there's some disturbance, sir.
Okay, I'll cut the video so that the bandwidth gets enhanced. Okay, first of all, Ankit, very well structured paper. Thank you so much for presenting to us.
Thank you.
What's the basic reason in your study by which the LFPR declines from 2005 onwards? So that's my first question, which you haven't probably addressed in greater detail. And I would offer quite an intra-regional variation within South Asia, where in Nepal, we probably see a higher incidence of LFPR in a significant way across years. So in your study, did you see any traces or any hint that why is such huge regional differences within Nepal and India? And my third question is, if you have addressed that, do you think the Lewis model of agricultural development and therefore industrial growth can have a beacon of light shed on your data? So the structural transformation that's happening in agriculture would say that the Lewis model would probably still be relevant. At a very superficial analysis, we see the LFPR declining 2005 onwards. So if you have a point of view on that, please say that.
Okay. So regarding your first question, which was like what can be the reason for the declining female labor force participation rate in rural India? There's not one particular reason for the decline. So it becomes very difficult to bisect and find out which are the significant reasons which are affecting. So one of the reasons which is very significant is the social constraints that women face in the rural India, particularly belonging from what we call middle class, which is which basically like constrains women from moving out and looking for jobs. But again, like there have been very few studies which specifically focuses on that. So that's why the literature, that's why my work also couldn't highlight comprehensively about that specific factor. The second question about the difference between the female labor force participation rate from India to other developing countries in South Asia, I couldn't actually see the trends of countries like Nepal and Bangladesh, particularly Nepal having a relatively higher female labor force participation rate. But I am assuming that because of the economic trajectory that they follow, so I'm assuming that because of the economic trajectory that they follow can be one of the reasons that is explaining this. And the last question regarding the Lewis model, I somehow feel that because of this structural transformation, the female labor force participation rate is being affected, but particularly in rural India, where this transformation is not very apparent, which is not very visible. So it would be again a far-fetched conclusion to apply Lewis model and say about any structural transformation resulting in female labor force participation rate.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Dr. Tian, do you have any questions, sir?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ankit.
Thank you.
I would now request team 2, which is team Nudge, to share their presentation.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Can you present, Anushri?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, judges, good afternoon, organizers, and good afternoon, my fellow participants. I'm Abhijit Rathod, and here are Anushri and Akhilesh are my team members. So we are here to present our study on the compromise effect and decoy effect. So I'll define compromise effect first. So compromise effect is an effect wherein people tend to choose the middle options than extreme ones if they are given the options. And decoy effect is a phenomena wherein if the fourth option is introduced, then people tend to choose their tend to change their preferences towards the next option. Yes, so this is the table of contents. We will start with the literature review methodology, then we'll do the primary research and conclude with the industry applications. So the goal of the study was to understand the consumer behavior towards different products. The second goal was to study whether adding a jumbo size cup has an effect on the preferences of cup sizes. So we conducted two experiments. In the first experiment, we considered Coca-Cola as an object, and in the second experiment we conducted fruit juice as an object. So and the scope of the study is limited to the target population of 18 to 32 years old population. Yes, next slide. Yeah, so the book, The Last Mile, which was written by Dr. Dilip Soman, discusses several examples of behavioral economics, which are linked to the compromise effect and decoy effect, as well as nudging behavior. So two observations from the study of Dr. Soman. First is people tend to choose the medium-sized coffee cup, irrespective of the volume of the medium-sized cup, if there are three options given. Second observation that as long as there is a bigger or more expensive option or smaller and cheaper option, the middle option was more likely to get selected. So this demonstrates the compromise effect. We're trying to demonstrate the same effect through our study. Another research was based on the central stage effect, which revealed that people have tendency to select the option which is placed in the middle physically. And these nudges have been frequently used to facilitate behavior change in variety of applications such as public policy domains and public health domains as well. Next. So the methodology we used in our experimentation was randomized, unbalanced, and mixed model. So we collected responses from people through online form, wherein we got 114 responses from all the groups. The respondents were divided into three major groups: control group, treatment group, and hybrid group. So for control group, we introduced 3 cup sizes with fluctuation of prices. For treatment group, we introduced an additional cup, which is called a jumbo cup. So we introduced total 4 cup sizes. And in hybrid group, we introduced both the cup sizes, 3 cup and 4 cup scenarios, to the same population to see if the same population has different behavior or same behavior. Nudges applied were, so there were 4 nudges we applied. First is the introduction of a jumbo cup, then the fluctuations of prices, like 20% increase, 20% decrease, and 50% increase in price. So to verify our hypothesis, we use t-test and chi-square test to ensure that the effect of confounding variables. We use randomization, and wherein we use a unique approach. So in the Google form, we gave 3 letters, E, J, and U, which were shuffled for different respondents. So in that way, we ensure that there is no confounding effect or the minimal confounding effect, so that people get randomized group allocations. For the 2 experiments, experiment 1 and 2, design was same, method was same. The sample size were different for both. For the first sample size was 72 participants, and for the second experiment, it was 42 participants. The number of participants in each group are given in the condition section. Factors used are same, except that a jumbo cup of Coca-Cola was used for the experiment 1, and jumbo cup of fruit juice was used for the experiment 2. So this is just to ensure if there is an effect of health consciousness on the preference of cups. Again, the same t-test and chi-square test were used to verify the hypothesis. Next slide.
So we have created 4 research questions based on our secondary study. So research question 1 is to study the consumer behavior towards the cup size when the nudge was introduced using the decoy effect. So the hypothesis is the introduction of decoy will not change the preference of the cup size. An explanatory variable is the cup size dependent on introduction of the new cup. And the confounding variables are age, income, gender, and consumption frequency, which will be same for all the 4 research questions. The research question 2 is to study the compromise effect. The hypothesis is the mean of the sizes of cups will be equal to 2, which is middle-sized cup. And in this hypothesis, there is no independent variable. Our Q3 is to study the effect of increase and decrease in prices on the selection of the cup sizes. And hypothesis for this is the mean of the cup size after increasing price by 20% will be equal to the mean of the cup size with original prices. And cup size is dependent on the price. And at last, research question 4 is to study the effect of the simultaneous introduction of an additional cup on the selection of cup size. So the hypothesis is the introduction of decoy to the same population will not change the preference of the cup size. So for this, the size of the cup is dependent on simultaneous introduction of an additional cup. And now to understand the data better, we have created EDA. So the demographics of the 72 participants in experiment 1 are as follows. The sample is almost equally distributed among all the groups. Equal number of males and females have responded to the survey. We can see 90% of the respondents belong to 18 to 32 years of age group, as that's the target group. And 78% of the respondents drink Coke less than once a week, and 17% drink Coke once a week. The respondents are equally distributed among all the income groups, and the responses were collected from more than 15 different states in India. We can also see a similar pattern in experiment 2, so which had 42 participants. So sample is equally distributed in this. There are more female respondents than male respondents for this experiment, and 95% of the respondents belong to the 18 to 32 years of age group. And more than 50% of the respondents drink fruit juice either once a week or less than that. And we can also see income is fairly distributed for major buckets and the buckets. So now the key observations for experiment 1. So for control group, we can see price changes have a less impact on middle-sized cups than on small and large-sized cups. When the price of large-sized cups was increased by 20% or by 50%, demand for large-sized cups fell to 0, whereas demand for small-sized cups surged. And for treatment group, we can see larger cups are less affected by price changes than smaller and middle-sized cups. As it can be seen, demand for large cups did not go to 0, and as it did in the control group. So when the price isn't stated in the hybrid model, respondents are more likely to choose the small-sized cup. Otherwise, the middle-sized cup becomes the preferred option. So there are a few observations from the experiment 2 as well. So in this, we can see the trend analysis for control group. So when the prices isn't, so we can see the price decreases as the respondents tend to choose the larger cups, and for 50% increase in price, smaller cups were preferred. And the overall effect of the price on medium-sized cups was lesser. So according to the chart 2, the introduction of a jumbo cup reduced demand for cup 1 and 2, while increasing demand for cups 2, 3, and 4. We may also notice that jumbo cup has a 30% share, and from chart 3, it's observed as price decreased the demand for cup 4 4 increased. And when price increased, there is a significant decline in the demand for cup 3 and 4, and whereas for cup 1 and 2, demand increased. And from the hybrid model, we can infer the comparison between treatment and control group to when price is introduced. After the treatment, share of small cups decreased, but share of jumbo cups increased. Now we can discuss the test results.
Okay, over the next few slides, we will be looking at the results of the various research questions we have framed as part of this project. First research question is basically to verify the impact of this decoy, to verify the decoy effect. And it asks whether the introduction of decoy will impact the preference of the consumers. So we have performed a 2 sample t-test assuming equal variance. So coming to the experiment 1, we can see there are 2 scenarios, 3 cup scenario, which is basically the control group, and 4 cup scenario, which is the treatment group. And we have the mean preference of the consumers in each of the scenario. So we have performed the test at a confidence interval of 95%. And for the experiment 1, we have got a p-value of 0.049, which is less than the alpha value of 0.05, which essentially means we'll have to reject the null hypothesis. So it essentially means there is a significant difference in the preference of the people when a jumbo cup is introduced. So similar is the result when we go for the experiment 2 as well. We were able to see that there is a significant difference in the preference of the people when a 4th cup, a jumbo sized cup, is introduced. Moving on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, here we have the second research question, which is to verify the compromise effect. So we know compromise effect is that the people tend to choose the middle option. So here we have 2 set of groups, control groups and treatment groups. So for both the experiments, we have one each. So here what we have done is we have found out a 95% confidence interval for both the groups, control groups and treatment groups. So in the case of a control group, the mid value is going to be 2 when there are 3 cups, 1, 2, and 3. And for the treatment group, when there are 4 options, the mid value is going to be 2.5. So the corresponding mean values we have got is in the first case, it is 1.6 and 1.866 respectively for the control group and treatment group. And we have the corresponding confidence interval for the same here. So basically, we can see that in all the 4 cases, like in each of the 2 cases for the 2 experiment, the mean value lies between the control groups. So the mid values of 2 and 2.5 lies between the confidence interval, 95% confidence interval for each of these scenarios. So that essentially means the compromise effect holds true in our experiment. Moving on to the third research question. Here we have tried to see the price sensitivity of the consumers and the preference of the consumers as per that. So when we increase the price with by 20%, we can see the preference of the consumers have decreased a little, that is from 1.6 to 1.35. But by looking at the p-value, we can see that there is no significant effect of that increase in the price of the mean preference of these consumers. At the same time, when we go to the decrease in price, when there is a 20% decrease in the price, the p-value is found to be less than alpha value, and there is a significant effect. The decrease in the price has a significant effect over the mean preference of the people. Over to the next slide. Here we have the same results for the experiment 2, and we have obtained similar results here as well. The increase in price hasn't made a statistically sound impact over the consumer preference, but the decrease in price have. Moving on to the fourth research question. Here we have introduced the decoy to same population to check the impact over the preference of the consumers. So we have done it on a hybrid group. Hybrid group essentially means in this, the respondents are initially provided with 3 cups and later they are given 4 cups to see this decoy effect. So in this, as you can see here, the p-values and the corresponding t-test have
Abhijit, I'm
confirmed
sorry.
that.
I'll have to stop you because it's 15 minutes already. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. I would now request judges to please ask questions.
Can you tell me what could be the differences in your finding across different age groups?
Hello, sir.
Differences in your finding across age groups or whether of the same category?
So we limited our research to only one category, 18 to 32 years old. So we haven't studied for different age groups as such.
Okay.
Yeah, but as a recommendation for further study, we do suggest that the study can be implemented in different age groups because that may have some effect on the preference choices.
But what is your understanding about this age group differences?
Sir, our general understanding is that because the younger people tend to choose Coca-Cola more, so they would prefer higher amount, but the older people given at this time may not choose higher amounts of Coca-Cola because they are more lean towards the traditional drinks. Yeah, that is what our understanding is.
Okay.
Yes.
So Abhijit, when you say younger and older, what age group are you taking?
This is subjective, but right now we are considering less than 32 years old as younger and more than 32 as older.
Okay.
Or yeah, this is but slightly a blur boundary though.
And the sample size which you have taken was 72 in Coca-Cola and 42 in juice. What was the reason behind this difference in the sample size?
Yes, ma'am. So what happened was that we first decided to conduct only for Coca-Cola, and when we when we got the responses, we then thought that even health consciousness might have some effect because we got that almost 70% respondents only drank less than once in a week Coca-Cola. So we just thought that some people might not like Coca-Cola as a soft drink. So we should also consider some other drinks which are more health conscious. And then we conducted the experiment again. So where we got only 42 responses for that.
Okay. Last question, what is the relevance of your study?
Ma'am, this had some industry implications. For example, this can be used to increase revenue for any company by just introducing a decoy. Let's say there are 3 options right now with Coca-Cola, and they can introduce one 4th option or larger bottle so that the consumers tend to choose the second largest option. By that, I mean the volume of sales will increase, and that's why revenue will increase. This will also help in forecasting the demand, which will help companies to plan their inventory and manufacturing facilities in better way.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Well, Abhijit, thanks a lot for your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
From where Dr. Singh has left off, I think she asked you a very pointed question, and I take off from there. So from a behavioral economics point of view, if you were to go back to the prospect theory, for example, now this has no direct impact on your study at the moment, but do you think your middle path consumer is the typical risk-averse consumer of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky? That's number one.
Yes.
Number two, I worked on the brand myself. I always found that Coca-Cola in its marketing strategy preferred to work with the larger SKUs. You know that, right? Like the smaller SKUs did not really work in the Indian market. So it's always the flagship 1 liter, 1.5, and then 2 liters. So what we saw in the market, both, whether it was Nielsen or whether it was Leo Burnett, the literage increased over the years. And it's within the same demographics that you talk about. But we did not see whether it had an income decile effect in the consumption pattern of the SKUs. And therefore, the question is, in the portfolio management, what we saw, there was a markedly enhanced preference for larger SKUs. Your research says that the consumer would probably prefer smaller SKU. So I find that an interesting variance. The other technical point I have is that you saw the nudges going up by 20% upwards, 20% downwards.
Yes, sir.
But on the SKUs, it's 50% up.
Yes.
What was the reason for you to have chosen dissimilar categories of nudges or dissimilar quanta of nudges?
Yes, sir. To address the last question, we just, the increase in, we just wanted to see if there is an impact of increasing prices more, because that directly aligns to the revenue as such. Decreasing prices will not help increase the revenue, even because there is always a saturation point. So decreasing by 50% price will definitely lead to increase in sales, but again, there is one threshold point where we cannot go beyond that threshold point. So that's why we just try to see that if increasing 50% will decrease the revenue, but by how much. If it does not decrease the revenue by very large bracket, say, then they can try to increase the prices more. So that is one of the ways to increase the revenue. Yeah, that was the thought behind it. Yes, sir.
So to add on to that, so basically, we, like the way you mentioned, revenue will increase. Like when we are increasing the price, it will lead to the increment in revenue, but decrease won't help. But we just wanted to see the consumer behavior, whether there is a change in their preference or not, how it is affecting their preference. So whether when we are including the nudge jumbo size cup and when the price is decreased, so whether their preference is changing, they are preferring the bigger cup or not. So we just wanted to study that.
I find that fascinating because you're dealing in the FMCG category, and where the income or the price elasticity is tremendous. And despite that, you chose a 50% or more than 20 as the category of nudge. So I find that strategy interesting. But having said that, I think it's a great subject, and you guys could look at the methodology, refine it.
Yes, sir.
It is relevant for someone like a Nielsen or a Coca-Cola per se. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you so much.
Yeah, Vijit and Anushree. Okay, I would request the judges to please give the scores to the team.
I have a question. Do you want for us to score right now, or we could put the scores later?
If you think that you will be able to score it later towards the end, that's okay. I mean, all the teams together. Whatever you prefer. Do you prefer scoring all the teams at the end, or as you feel?
No, what I'm doing is I'm scoring on a separate sheet for myself.
Okay.
So
towards the end,
I find that more optimal.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm collating that. I'm going to put that on the platform. So
okay.
Is that?
Yes. You can put it in the sheet later on. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
All right. So we will move to our next team, which is Harshal Pahuja.
Hi, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Right. So I'll just start. Ma'am, let me know when I can start.
Yeah, you can start, Harshal.
Okay. So good afternoon, day judges. So I'm Harshal Pahuja. I'm going to be giving you a brief about my paper, which focuses on India's global trade potential given the gravity model approach, and also it gives you a presentation.
You're a little less audible. Can you be a little louder, please?
Am I audible now, sir?
If it is, yeah, it's a bit dim. Your voice is a bit dimmer.
Do you mind if I plug in my earphones in a minute? Then I'll just take 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Is my audio better now, ma'am?
Yes.
Right, so should I start again, ma'am?
Yes.
Right, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting you my paper, which is on India's global trade potential given the gravity model approach. And also side by side, I'll also be giving you a brief as to the psyche I had while I was writing this paper. So to begin with it, I'll start with an abstract, give you my abstract, show you the introduction of what a gravity model approach is, the estimation I have used and the methodology I have used, proceed towards the policy implications, and at the end, give a implications of it. So the whole idea of this research began that, as we all know, merchandise trade has been a crucial determinant of GDPs. Now, ever since the corona pandemic came into play, India's GDP contracted by 7.8% in the year 20 to 21. However, we witnessed a growth of about 1.6% in Q4. And very recently, India had put up a target of achieving $400 billion in terms of its merchandise exports for the year 2020 to 2021, as stated by the Commerce and Industry Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal. So in this paper, what I'm trying to do is to carry out an estimation of trade potential for India in regards to its top 25 exporting nations. And I'm trying to realistically calculate and estimate the possibility of India achieving this target of $400 billion using the gravity model approach. So what I've done is I've used data sets of the year 2020 along with other factors which influence, and with this, I am able to deliver escalation trends of merchandise exports and give you plausible elasticities and coefficients which I'm putting into the gravity model and then using to estimate the trade potential for India. Now, in our case, unused trade potential or untapped trade potential is represented in all cases where India's trade potential is less, or India's actual trade is less than that of the one predicted by the model. Now, this shall further have policy implications, as I will be able to clearly define and suggest as to which country or which region's policies should be modified to reach the maximum potential. Now, proceeding forward to the introduction, we all know that merchandise exports have had a major crucial role in our GDP determination. And ever since 1991, we had Dr. Manmohan Singh leading to a major revolution in 1990, which was three things he did, which is liberalization, globalization, and privatization. And India's trade to GDP ratio actually increased 23% during this time span of 12 years, which is from 1991 to 2003. Nonetheless, my point being that overall, India's share in the world trade is still low and is actually unimpressive. Even if you compare it to countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, it is still very less given the size and the amount of trade percentage we hold. And if we compare it with countries like China, China averages around 15%. Even countries like Japan and Korea, given their size, given the lack of resources, they're giving a very significant percentage of share in the world. Therefore, India's world trade share fell to from 3.9% to 3.6%. We can find a need to enhance the volume of India's trade. So the aim of this paper basically is to estimate the trade potential of India using the gravity model of approach. And gravity model of approach is in fact one of the most widely used models for predicting the bilateral trade flows. So I'll continue with the theoretical framework behind this model. When we talk about classical trade theories, the main classical trade theory given by Adam Smith was that he said that countries need to produce the goods they have an absolute advantage in, and they should indulge in trade and it will give gains to all those countries. However, this argument was flawed for a simple reason, that it did not give a reason as to why countries which do not have an absolute advantage still get benefits from trade. A newer classical trade theory evolved, which was David Ricardo, who said that nations should indulge in trading those or exporting those goods in which it has the highest comparative advantage and import those goods in which it has the least comparative advantage. Furthermore, if you go towards this, a Heckscher-Ohlin model was developed from Ricardo's theory, which actually predicted that a country will export products which utilize materials which they have in abundance and import the products which they have in scarcity. If you actually look at all of these classical trade theories, we actually found out that they have a major flaw, that they all fail to explain a very simple thing, that there is a huge amount of trade which occurs between countries which have similar resources, similar sizes, and similar endowments, which gave a rise to new trade theories, which more and more focused on imperfect competition. They even focus on product differentiation, considering the amount of products which have come into play in our markets and even economies of scale. And such a new trade theory which came into play was the gravity model. So the gravity model is actually evolved from the physics gravitational equation, which basically says that the attraction of gravity between two objects is actually proportional to the masses of both the objects and is inversely proportional to the square of the distances. If we apply it in an economic point of view, it was in the year 1963 that we had an economist, Timbergen, who first applied a gravity model to analyze the bilateral trade flows between two countries. And in his model, he was able to show that GDP rather has a positive effect on trade flows between two countries, which basically means that countries which have bigger economic sizes and closer to each other, they tend to trade more. to the year 2005, a rather important research paper on this made by Krugman and Obsterfeld utilized the very same model, and they provided a common model which has been used as follows, where the total trade from country I to J is estimated as I've shown below in this. But what happened is, post the research of Timbergen, a trend began where other economists started applying this very same model to find out the trade flows. The example I am using here is the 2004 model, as it is highly coded and recognized by all major organizations, be it UN, EU, which focused on the trade potential between the Mercosur and European agreements, which were signed between both the trade blocs. Now, what they did in 2004 was a little complex model, and they included more variables, such as infrastructure, the exchange rate, and even income differences, as they are all factors which affect the bilateral trade flows. Coming over to what I have done in my model, given the above literature framework, I have taken two hypotheses. First one being that there is a positive effect of economic size, which is the GDP or GNP on trade. And second one, that there is a negative effect of geographical distance on trade. And taking the gravity model logarithm, I've also included other variables that other than GDP and distances. I have enhanced this paper by using other variables such as contiguity, distance, trade, PTS, and the common languages, which can all affect the bilateral trade between India and its partner countries. So below, this is how the logarithm, just a minute, I'm so sorry. Yes. This is how the logarithmic equation would look like. Below, I have explained all the reasons and how all these coefficients would influence the trade between both these countries. GDP, as I've mentioned before also, the GDP of India and its partner countries are used as a measure of economic size. Now, this data I've taken from IMF. EXIJ, the variable which I've taken, is used to measure the existing trade India has already done with the country. Now, the value P is used to estimate the PTAs in place, because what happens with the PTAs moment India has a preferential trade agreement with some country, it is a very positive sign towards the trade India has with that very country. Moving below, in the case of distance, what I had actually had a dilemma in place. So what I've done is I've calculated the distance of the capitals between the two countries. So I've taken the distance of Delhi with the respective capitals. Now, this has been done from a 1997 research paper, which I have found in the net. And this, in fact, has a negative impact on trade flows, because the more the distance between two countries, the less the trade, because your freight costs, your transportation costs, they all go up. Now, all the calculation in this model has been done using Python, Gravity, and Panda libraries. So moving over, I'll just show you a few dilemmas which I faced. So I actually had a dilemma between choosing between Python and R. And the reason I've chosen Python is because while we're using FGLS model and regression models, Python actually makes it easier to facilitate statistical calculation and simultaneous comparisons in the same way. Other than this, for the final estimation, I had two ways to proceed by it. This is the first method which I had available, and this is the second method. Now, the first method, which Jacob said, is whenever we use coefficients in our place, if coefficients, they are inaccurate by any way, which they tend to be, he had recommended a method of speed of convergence. Now, speed of convergence basically said that the average growth rate of potential trade upon average growth rate of actual trade into 100 divided by 100. It acknowledges that convergence if the growth rate of potential trade is smaller than that of the actual trade. As a result, the speed of convergence will be negative. And in the opposite case, we will have a divergence. Now, this method is effective in the fact that it exploits the flexible structure of the data during the estimation process. However, due to external limitations of the fact that I had to make this paper in 15 pages, I chose to go by a different estimation result manner in which I estimated delta T. Now, delta T basically is the trade difference between the potential and actual trade in percentage terms in bilateral trade between India and partner countries. So we use a regression of the equation which I mentioned before, use the FGLS method to calculate the average growth rate and the difference of potential trade value and actual trade value in percentage terms. Now, basically, to explain to you what FGLS basically is a model in which the estimates of the coefficients of a multiple linear regression model and their covariance matrix in the presence of a non-spherical innovation, or basically when there is a technique for estimating unknown parameters in a linear regression model, when there is a certain degree of correlation between the residuals in a regression model. Now, coming back to my results, we will actually find that most countries, in fact, have less than a value of the predicted trade between the actual trade which is being done. You can just have a look, brief look, before I will proceed down. Coming over to the policy implications, as I mentioned from the table above, most countries, in fact, have less than predicted trade with India. Now, from a policy perspective, we need to consider a lot of variable factors which are going around. And the main factor which right now is going to affect trade in India is the fact that RCEP has just come into play. Now, RCEP is it's more a big, so rather a large PTA which is going to influence and change the trade direction of India with other countries. So India as a nation now has to prioritize its trade relations, especially in other regions, and also at the same time learn to sign PTAs with its immediate neighbors. Because what we can see above is that there's a major lack of trade with countries like Mexico and Brazil, and especially with South American countries, there's a major lack of trade. And if you specifically talk region-wise, given its top 25 exporting countries, India actually has been able to utilize its relations with the EU and maximize its trade above the predicted level. However, a major flaw which I find in the policies of trade in India is that there are no Middle Eastern or African countries even present in this list. And even though these countries are rich in resources, they might be going through a lot of negative externalities, for example, civil wars or territorial disputes. But I genuinely think that all these countries do show a promising future for India's trade, and they are actually witnessing booms. And the fact is that given the estimate by our foreign ministry, which that India will have a trade of 385 billion, India just needs to increase its trade percentage by 4% to actually break this barrier. So to summarize, the main policies we have in place is that India needs to expand trade in two major regions. One is Middle East and East Africa. Second one is to create PTAs in Asia so as to combat the post-RCEP trade direction changes. And third one is to expand trade in South American countries, as most countries are trading much below their potential. Now, coming over to the conclusion, the main purpose of this study was to take into account the factors which affect the bilateral trade and try to predict if the goal set by India of $400 billion can be achieved or not. However, our estimates of India's global trade potential revealed that the magnitude of India's trade potential is maximum in the EU, followed by Western Europe and North America. And the potential for expansion in its top 25 exporting countries is the maximum with countries like Brazil and Mexico. However, what I would like to highlight, this study also has some limitations. It is limited in two major ways. First one is it is limited in the data, where some other areas in the world have not been observed, which have been limited to only 25 countries. And second one is that there are a lot other factors which actually affect bilateral trade, which could not be included due to the fact that I had to keep this paper in the time scale of 15 pages only. So other than this, just two more limitations which I would like to suggest is that other than that, the regression models, because each of the coefficients which have been taken, they could not be displayed due to this. And another thing is the Python code which I used could not be briefly explained. So just to conclude, I would like to say in the future, a similar study has to be done with the scale of data, and more time has to be conducted, and it will genuinely give a universal result with fewer errors. However, this paper, in my opinion, it provides an interesting result and will actually help policymakers to obtain a clearer view of trade improvements, knowing the trends of India, because it will give them a clearer picture as to knowing which regions to tap into. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harshal. I would now request judges to please ask questions.
Thank you, Harshal.
Yes, ma'am.
So what was the source of your data, Harshal?
Ma'am, IMF, ma'am. I've actually had a mixture. My GDPs were taken from IMF. The other data are usually included on World Bank, and even your International Trade Association has all the data related to trade. So they publish this data every year. But the reason I've taken data of 2020 is because the data from 2021 to 2022 has still not been published. So that's why I was limited to using the data of 2020 to predict my trends.
And what was the basis of selecting these 25 countries?
Ma'am, the top 25 exporting.
Top 25. Okay.
Yes,
and out of these 25 countries, 10 had a positive value. That is more than the predicted trade.
Ma'am, less than that. It was around 7, ma'am.
Okay, less than that. So have you analyzed the factors for those countries as well?
Ma'am, I was limited in the fact that I could only use a few amount of factors, which were contiguity, which were your PTS in place, which were the common languages in place, the distance and all, just because of the size of my paper. It could not exceed 15 pages, because the more variable data I use, the more regression models I'll have to draw. That is why I said I'm still suggesting that if another study can be done to not only improve the number of countries, but also improve the number of variable factors. Because other factors, even if we take into play something like the amount of income someone is spending, suppose we have things like Big Mac index. I'm spending, let's say, $1, someone is spending $1.6. That is also going to influence the trade. The exchange rates between countries are also influencing trade. If all these factors can be put into place, they will certainly make the model more complex, but they will improve the amount of error terms this will have. So it will make it more
beneficial, ma'am. That is, I'm suggesting to have another study on this, given a proper space and time.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I find it fascinating that despite your excellent effort, you haven't chosen UNCTAD data.
Sorry, sir, your voice is lagging a bit.
This is the trade data, right?
Yes, sir. This is the trade data.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. You're audible. Yes, sir.
What I asked you is that I see that you've taken IMF data as your base data, but you haven't considered UNCTAD data. So I find that fascinating.
Sir, haven't considered what data exactly? I'm not getting that word.
So the United Nations Trade Organization, UNCTAD?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I would assume that you would have considered UNCTAD data, because that's probably considered to be the definitive trade data.
Definitely, sir.
My
I'll take
first
that into consideration, sir.
observation. My second one is that by all counts, in the real world policy, we see India turning to be quite autarkic more and more, right? It's turning less trade friendly globally.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that's what has been happening. And also, I don't know whether you track the USTR reports. And India has been singled out repeatedly over a couple of USTR reports that it is being trade restrictive. So, what against to trade? Do you think that the autarkic India would actually be able to achieve the numbers that the policymakers has set out to be? Now, this may not have any direct impact on the work that you have done or the modeling that you have done. Point is, in the real life world, India is turning more and more autarkic and therefore less trade friendly. RCEP is a challenge.
Yes, sir.
Sure, because India stays out of it. And like you mentioned, whether it's Brazil,
we lost your voice.
So I was saying that RCEP is a challenge because India is not part of the RCEP. I'm going to cut my video actually.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I will repeat. So RCEP is a challenge for India because India is not part of it. And more and more, if you look at the customs scenario, the country of origin requirement makes it even complicated for India now to trade through the ASEAN. And in Brazil and Mexico, they are part of what's called the Mercosur.
Yes, sir.
So it's a bloc. Therefore, whatever trade India has to do with that part of the world will have to be on the sidelines of Mercosur. So I'm coming to you because you mentioned that it will probably warrant another research paper. So please have a look.
Definitely, sir. Definitely.
Your work is good, but the point is trade is a very complex matter, as you know.
Right, sir.
And but do consider other exogenous variables, for example, the oil shock and the relative cost of environmental pollution in large-scale shipping,
right, sir.
The ULCCs, and how going forward it will impact maritime trade. Because as you know, in the aviation industry, there is something called CORSIA, which will willy-nilly impact global aviation emissions. And maritime trade is way more polluting than aviation.
Yes.
And therefore, these are probably the variables that probably could go into our model.
Definitely, sir. Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, sir, do you have any questions to answer?
No questions from me.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Harshil. Now we would request team 4 to please join us, which is GNITS team.
Sure, 1 minute. I hope the PPT is visible and I'm audible.
Yeah, you're audible and your PPT is also visible.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, so our good afternoon to the esteemed panel, faculty, and my fellow participants. So our paper is on, are we getting closer to the optimal portfolio optimization method? So before I get started, I want to say that what we tried to do is we wanted to see the evolution between the various portfolio optimization methods. So we didn't want to go into depth in each of these methods, but rather just see how each method is better and different from the one before it. So if you give me 1 minute. Nicola, can you please share the presentation?
Yeah, 1 minute. Krishna, can you see it?
Yeah, please put it in the slideshow. Okay. Okay, so let's start off by what is portfolio optimization. So next slide, please. So portfolio optimization is the selection of the best portfolio or the best asset distribution on the basis of, and we have many portfolio scenarios. So we have to select the best portfolio on the basis of optimizing a particular objective function. So this is the selection of the best portfolio on the optimization of the objective function. And this objective function can be different in different models. For example, we start off with the basic theory, the modern portfolio theory by Markowitz. The first theory focuses on the objective function of diversification, which is having the most diverse assets, not putting all your eggs in the same basket to reduce the risks. The second model that we'll look through further is CVAR. So in that, we take the objective function as having low CVAR values as what we're trying to optimize. And the third is computer-aided approaches. So these computer-aided approaches, which we shall see later, reinforcement learning and neural networks, accommodate the uncertainty of the times we're in right now as an objective function. So the key point is they're continuously learning and they can accommodate this uncertainty and learn from that uncertainty to get better models. However, even with all of these different approaches, we have the abstraction of all of these different approaches eventually just say the same thing, which we all know and conclude is a good portfolio, high returns and low risk. So now if we take each asset as an independent entity and we just explore it as if it were in vacuum, then on the basic definition, then we would want high returns and a low risk. So here we take the risk parameter as variance. So we not only want high returns, but we want consistently high returns. So if we see it as an independent entity, I'm considering MRF as one asset. So if I just consider just MRF, I would say that this is a terrible investment to make with negative returns, that is losses, and that too, those losses are consistent losses of 2%. But what we have to consider is a portfolio is not a collection of independent entities. There's a synergy effect, which we have to see a portfolio as a complex system. So not only should we see the individual assets, but we need to see how each asset in the portfolio affects the other assets. Therefore, we have the introduction of a variance covariance matrix. Not only should we see, can you please go to the previous slide? Not only should we see that how each asset is is a variable with time, which is variability, but we should also see covariance, how each asset is variable with the other assets. So Honeywell is also affecting MRF. They don't exist independently.
Okay, so portfolio optimization, it was established in the year 1950 through the Markowitz modern portfolio theory. From there, we have come a long way to conditional value at risk and computer-aided methods using neural networks and reinforcement learning. Now, this is considered to be a welcome evolution, keeping the point in mind that the the historical modeling, it would no longer it would have a place in this volatile scenario.
So the purpose of this paper was we wanted to see how each model is evolving with time, but not only in respect to the model, but also how the computer-aided supports like MATLAB are helping us create more optimized models with time. So, and secondly, we wanted to know how did we arrive at this present definition of portfolio optimization? How did we arrive at the current statistics or the current factors that we know is an optimal portfolio, tracing it back to its roots? The third is we wanted to find an approach which is user friendly. This should be an approach which anyone can use without the mathematical constraints of the nitty gritty formulae. And it should be a time saving method that you don't have to invest a lot of time to get your best optimal portfolio. And lastly, but most importantly, answer the title of the question. Are we getting closer to the optimal portfolio optimization method? Will there be a time where even with the given uncertainty of where we live or what we do, we also need to know that we need to get maximum returns with this, with having infinitely small risk.
Okay, so for the methodology, for the data in our analysis, we considered the data from Bombay Stock Exchange, which consists of 10 diverse stocks, and some of those include Honeywell, MRF, and Yamuna Syndicate, and Nestle.
So let's start with the first theory. So for early theories, we consider the Markowitz theory. So this is Markowitz theory. The basis, as we explored earlier, is diversification. We want the maximum returns at a given rate of risk. So the three parameters that we see here: expected return, return variance, and Sharpe ratio. So the first thing that we had to do to process the data was calculate the expected returns and variance from our data set. So here we have the average and monthly returns and variance for each of our 10 assets that we selected. Secondly, we needed to find out how each of these assets in the portfolio affect each other. Therefore, we constructed a variance covariance matrix to see how these assets vary with each other with respect to time. So now these were the independent entities. So if we saw just as an asset, we wanted to calculate the returns and the variance, but we're seeing it in a portfolio perspective. So as for that, the expected portfolio returns would be the weighted summation of all the individual returns of the assets. And similarly, even the variance would be the weighted summation of the individual variances with respect to how much it's deviating from the mean. So now comes the most important parameter in Markowitz model, the Sharpe ratio. So the Sharpe ratio tells us how much of the maximum returns which you can get, ERP, with a given rate of a given risk. So the given standard deviation, also keeping into consideration the risk-free rate. So the more the Sharpe ratio is above 1, so if we consider a portfolio with Sharpe ratio around 2 or 1, that would be more of the on the acceptable good side, whereas 3 to 4 would be excellent portfolios. So in each stage, what we wanted to do was see how we're comparing the current stage with the previous stage to show an evolution. So as this is the first stage, I'm comparing the optimal risky portfolio, which we got using the Markowitz model, with a basic primitive equally weighted portfolio. So we can see by just taking the same 10 assets, but changing the distribution or changing the weights, we can see tremendous increases in the returns, as well as changing of the Sharpe ratio to from an acceptable portfolio to an excellent portfolio of 3.8. So not only did the returns increase drastically with over 20%, but also the Sharpe ratio shows that we've went from an average portfolio to a very good portfolio by just manipulating the weights used.
Before we move on to the next stage, let us consider the concept of efficient frontier. Efficient frontier, it gives a set of optimal portfolios. That is, each point on this efficient frontier, it represents a portfolio that is possible.
Okay, so because of the time constraint, we'll go through this a bit quick. CVR model is basically what this is already an optimization of the VAR model, where we have a certain extent of risks which we are expecting for a given investment. And but especially in these times, as it's so volatile, we need to consider what if our investment, or what if our investment is so volatile that it goes beyond this VAR breakpoint. So this CVR model is a weighted average of all of those expected losses which are beyond that VAR point. So let's see the differences. So now on this stage, how is this stage CVR more optimal than Markowitz model? So using MATLAB, we have this amazing data visualization where we can clearly see first of all, the difference in the distribution of weights on the right side. And on the left side, we see a higher efficient frontier, which says for the same rate of risk, we can have, we give a set of portfolios to select for, which give more effective returns or higher returns for the same risk rate. So let's quickly go into the last stage, which is computer-aided theories with reinforcement learning and neural networks. So the best thing about reinforcement learning is you don't need to give in your model in the supervised learning phase the input and output mapping, which is you don't need to tell your model which of the following are suboptimal or optimal. And this the reinforcement learning method will exploit past information and use it to explore future scenarios. So it will continuously learn along with the data that you keep providing it. And neural networks is great because, as I said before, portfolio theory is more of a complex network. So we can't see each entity without seeing another entity. We always need to see it as effect of all the entities together. And neural networks is the best way to do it with its continuous learning and its ability to see something as a complete whole system. So the value addition of our paper is that we wanted to see that an investor itself uses a machine learning paradigm. The supervised learning is we give the investor the previous models to learn from, and now we can use this data to extrapolate it further to create more optimal models in the future. We wanted to understand the roots for the portfolio optimization and the drawbacks in each model and how they were accommodated. However, our limitations were that there could be organizational constraints where you only could invest a certain amount in a particular asset, and optimal is not always realistic. Just because we want an optimal solution doesn't mean that we can invest that particular amount based on the constraints of your organization or based on other factors. And the frontier gives us a set of the optimal portfolios which we can choose from, but choosing in that set is up to us on how risk averse we are. So the key findings is we saw the evolution in each stage as before. We saw how tools like MATLAB can help us visualize data clearly, and how MATLAB could help us calculate 1,000 scenarios in mere seconds. And not only that, but with the advancement of technology like MATLAB, people with not that much financial background like me could also be part of portfolio optimization. And to answer the title of the paper, yes, we are moving closer to an optimal portfolio, but methods are only as efficient as the investor. The methods are like a toolbox. Anyone can use the same tools, but some achieve better results than others. So thank you for letting us present, and we really like this opportunity from ISBF to get into the field of finance and at least have a basic understanding of portfolio optimization. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujana and Nikhila. I would now request judges to please ask questions.
You have used, I believe you have used the data relating to the trends from December 20 to December 21, right?
Yeah.
If you were to use 1 year earlier data, do you think that would be a more realistic picture because this was an unusual period?
Definitely. So the reason why we chose this data was to show the volatility. So we wanted to show how the computer-aided approaches are useful, because we wanted to show we can't approach this in a way where we only focus on the historical data. So we wanted to show the usefulness of these models, which is why we wanted to pick a scenario which is super volatile.
But the volatility can better be highlighted by comparing it with something which is not volatile.
Yes, we wanted, and also we wanted to choose the most recent data.
So if you would have studied one more year data, the previous year data, then possibly and compared the two, you could have got more realistic results or not. Yes or no?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yes.
I also had the same question, Dr. Tyal. Exactly the same question. And also, Sujana, on what basis have you selected these 10 stocks from BS?
So these were the stocks with, we wanted to select the stocks with the highest returns, given the fact that the stocks were so volatile that when we were using any other stocks, we were getting highly negative values and high losses. So we wanted to show a more realistic picture, or something that people can actually use. So these were the highest performing stocks, the highest performing assets.
And the portfolio theory applies to various asset classes. Why have you taken only equity as an asset?
That's the particular thing that we chose to just focus on, that because we wanted to just show the evolution in one aspect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent presentation. And I have a question, and this kind of segues into where Dean Tyal left off, that this is in a typical year in which your data set is culled out of. The other thing that comes to my mind is, what's the time dimension of the trade? For example, volatility in time t could be different from volatility in time t2 or t3. Now, I remember having read a particular article by Andy Haldane, the chief economist of the Bank of England, the former chief economist, where the literature said that over highly frequent buying and selling within a portfolio, you actually make losses. But there's a perverse incentive for the asset or the fund manager, given the portfolio under management, they would probably trade more, right? To just remunerate the brokerage. So, which in reality is consumer welfare diminishing. So in your study, this is a portfolio, it trades a lot or it doesn't trade a lot? That's the question I am asking. That if you were to take a less traded comparator, what would be the composition, or what would be the inference from the same model that you applied? So basically the question is about more trade, less trade within a given portfolio, and the volatility therein.
I would definitely think that we were going like models like the reinforcement learning model can it helps us use liquidity. It tells us immediately when there's going to be a downfall, so we can trade more. We can trade more because we have that we have those values because our model is continuously learning. But models like the MPT, which was the basic model, we don't have this data that's continuously evolving. Like we said, we are only focusing on a particular very volatile time frame in this paper. But so the earlier models won't be able to accommodate this. However, that's why we went into the future models, which are able to accommodate frequent trading or frequently learning on not only the scenario, but on the behavior of the investor as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sujana and Nikhila. I would now request next team, which is team number 5, Manish Vaidya, to share their presentation.
Ma'am, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. And my voice is also audible, right? Like
yeah, voice is clear. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so good afternoon, honorable panelists, faculty members, and participants. I am Anish Vaidya, a final year BSc Economics and Finance student from ISBF. My research theme is in environmental/ecological economics and primarily on checking the presence of the transportation emissions-induced environmental Kuznets curve for India for the period 1990 to 2016. Now, before we start, let's understand what the EKC hypothesis is all about. So essentially, EKC is a simple plot between emissions, environmental emissions, and income. It shows the degree of environmental degradation when the economy grows. So it gets its name from the American economist Simon Kuznets, who first initially gave the relationship between income inequality and economic growth. So the main feature of a Kuznets curve is its inverted U shape, which captures certain dynamics that are typical to what the research is about. Kuznets curve has also been evolved in different fields, for example, financial economics, ecological economics, transport economics, and so on, obviously with different dependent variables. Now, coming to the environmental Kuznets curve, the entire initial setup was first given by a researcher named Paneto et al. And was further refined by Grossman and Kruger. So these researchers set off all the modeling techniques and how the way to go about it. And from there on, a trail of research has been evolving and is yet going on the environmental Kuznets curve. So a test of the hypothesis is to check whether the inverted U shape holds using econometric tools. So in a simple statistical setup, we can say that the null hypothesis is where the EKC hypothesis is validated, or an inverted U shape holds, and alternative hypothesis is otherwise. So coming to the inverted U shape and why we're interested in this. So the inverted U shape has been of paramount importance and is the basis of EKC literature. It shows the dynamics of emissions as a country registers from an agrarian economy to a more service sector-based economy. In essence, there are three stages to economic growth as recognized by the early researchers. First is the pre-industrial economy. So this is the stage where primary sector is dominant and the major contributor to GDP. Capacity exists in the economy with respect to natural resources and stock, and hence there is limited environmental degradation. The second is the industrial stage or the industrial economy. At this stage, there is increasing urbanization, industrialization, more and more, an increase in manufacturing output, and hence so forth, emissions increasing at a higher rate. Now, the post-industrial stage is after the turning point. We see that after the maxima is where the tertiary sector is dominant. And at this stage, from here on, there is increasing information about emissions, awareness and investment in innovation. It limits the material basis of an economy and hence reduces environmental degradation. So this is the typical EKC hypothesis that has been postulated. And I aim to make a similar check for the transportation emissions. So while reviewing the research literature for India, the EKC literature for India, I saw that there's a gap when it comes to studying the transport sector EKC in isolation particularly. So there's immense amount of work to portray aggregate emissions, but sector-wise emissions yet has a lot of scope, not only in India, but in other countries. There are a few studies which have done this for the transport sector, namely in Saudi and Malaysia, and a few Western economies. It is also essential to note that transport sector is a key driver of economic growth. However, it comes with the externality of rising pollution and with obvious effects of cardiovascular and respiratory distresses. This is furthered by a rising middle class population and urbanization. It is also evident that emissions conscious consumption and sustainability are going to be a priority in the future, and an assessment of the same or a stance can be known with studies like the EKC hypothesis, and that's what the motivation is. Emissions can be expressed as a function of GDP and energy consumption from fossil fuels. So coming to the econometric modeling. So there are 4 steps to econometric modeling. So first we have the pre-estimation checks like stationarity, and then we have the checks for causality, co-integration, and further the OLS estimation for the EKC specification, which was given in the original paper. The data for per capita emissions, per capita energy consumption for fossil fuels and per capita GDP was collected from ourworlddata.org. from 1990 to 2016. I must also highlight at this point that obtaining data for emissions was a bit tricky and difficult, and hence that explains the sample size. So a simple eyeball test of the data indicates that there's an upward trend in all the three variables. Furthermore, all the three variables have been transformed to their natural log levels. So next we carry out a test for stationarity using the Dickey-Fuller tests. And then there is a test for co-integration, which is using the ARDL bounce test for co-integration proposed by Pesserin et al. Now, the reason for choosing this particular test amongst all other tests is that since my sample size is small, the ARDL model is quite friendly with smaller sample sizes, and hence this was chosen. Furthermore, the bounce test also is quite a powerful test when we are talking about small samples. And the lag selection in this model was done using the Akaike information criteria. And also this is, as it can be seen, this is not a level-based regression. And then we move on to the test for causality, where the Granger causality test was used to check the causal relationships for the underlying different specifications. So there are many regression specifications which different control variables, different regressors have been tested out. But for the purpose of presentation here, I've put the original specification that was given in the paper, which is the regression of transport emissions on GDP and the square and cube versions of GDP. So energy consumption is not included, and we take a cubic OLS approach to draw conclusions about the shape of the EKC. So this is the result for the linear regression for the equation mentioned in the previous slide. So as it can see, when the log per capita transport emissions are regressed on the GDP and the square and cube versions, so it can be seen that the GDP and the GDP cube have a negative coefficient sign. So this does not typically indicate an inverted U-shaped EKC. It can also be seen that all the variables are statistically significant. The model also has an explanatory power of 97.5%, which is a desirable model. And tests were also done. Post-estimation tests were done to rule out heteroscedasticity, autocorrelation, and multicollinearity. Furthermore, robust standard errors were used. Now coming to the interpretation. So as for co-integration tests, there were three specifications. So when transport emissions were expressed as a function of energy consumption and GDP, a long-term relationship was found. Hence, it can be said that income and energy consumption are major drivers of transport CO2 emissions. Transport sector entails so growth of transport sector entails higher vehicle registrations and higher emissions. So when GDP is a function of, so this was the result found, and in the other case, co-integration was also established when GDP was a function of energy consumption and transport emissions. This is also consistent with some other results. So coming to the Granger causality tests, so a Granger causality test was also carried out on the level variables using the VECM framework, the vector array correction framework. So there is no evidence of any short-run causality. However, a long-run causality is found running from energy consumption and GDP towards transport emissions. This implies that energy consumption and GDP are the contributing factors of emissions in the long run. Similar studies have been reported for EKC in the existing literature for aggregate emissions per se. So now coming to the cubic regression, as mentioned earlier, we see that the coefficients follow a sign that is consistent with concluding that the EKC has an inverted N shape. So this inverted N shape as of yet, so in the short run, it's seen that emissions are dropping, but primarily in the long run, we see that there's a there is a linear and positive relationship with between emissions and economic growth. So that's what is of more importance, that the coefficient of GDP square is positive, and even in the research literature, a lot of emphasis has been placed on this particular coefficient. So similar results have also been obtained for aggregate CO2 emissions in Bosnia by Mehmet et al. So hence we can reject the null hypothesis that a transport CO2 emissions EKC holds for India. Instead, we find an inverted N-shaped EKC, or we can say a long-run positive relationship between transport CO2 emissions and income is found. So in conclusion, it can be said that India has not yet reached its turning point. It has not deviated from the composition effect. Factors like rising urbanization, rising middle class incomes affects transport emissions adversely. And these are through the channels of affordability and greater access to personal mobility. So it is also essential to note that India is yet a developing country. And as mentioned earlier, it's yet to reach the turning point or the maxima. And yeah, that's about it over here. So what are the policy implications? I think this is also something that is mentioned elsewhere as well in the existing overall aggregate CO2 emissions literature, that reduction in GHG footprints by decarbonizing the transport sector and increasing public transportation have to be the key priorities. Things like metro rail projects, electric vehicles, increase in public awareness are of paramount importance when it comes to policy making in the transport and energy sector. Also, raising public awareness is quintessential. It is also very, very important that policymakers read the nexus between road transport, energy consumption, income, and transport emissions. This has also been seen with the statistical tests that have been carried out. And further methods, further policy measures include checks in personal mobility vehicles and policies and government programs to aim at incentivizing production and consumption of electric vehicles and public transportation, and also accelerate investment in energy innovation measures and delay any technical obsolescence. There is also some evidence to show that when we find an inverted N-shaped EKC, there are some policy-oriented lags that were observed, and hence that also need to be addressed. Now, coming to the scope of improvement of my study, I feel that a larger sample size would certainly help. With the challenges in data collection, I think with the larger sample size, we can obtain a more robust result. And a better understanding or a more detailed analysis of the inverted N shape is yet needed. And techniques like out-of-sample forecast to determine the turning point or as to the level of GDP where the economy will reach its turning point with different specifications can also be done to improve the effectiveness of this entire study. So that's it from my side, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, Manish. I would now request judges to please ask the questions.
So Manish, what was your sample size? And what is the source of data which you have used?
Ma'am, my sample size is 26 observations, and the source of the data is ourworlddata.org.
26. Okay.
Yeah.
How did you decide about this number?
Ma'am, I think it was not a choice. I found that there were a lot of issues while finding data for transport emissions. Either there were gaps in data, or like the per capita versions were not consistent when taking them in individual, and there were lots of issues in obtaining data itself. So I found this for 26 observations, so I just took it.
Okay, fine.
Okay, any other questions?
Oh, sorry, I thought I'll ask.
Please, Professor, please go
on. So my question is that given the environment Kuznets curve and the primary assumption that as India would climb up on the GDP slope, our emissions would eventually drop. But the inflection point is what the research question is going forward, right? But having said that, India may very well slip into the middle income trap. And as far as human history is concerned, no country as yet has been able to escape the middle income trap. In fact, I think a couple of months ago, Ratin Roy, the former director of ISBF, wrote about that India may not ever escape the middle income trap. And the point is, if so, then the assumptions that it would keep continuing on the middle income trajectory where do you think the Kuznets curve would be vis-a-vis us? The other point is also that what is unknown to us, the externalities related to the denser implementation of green mobility. What will happen to the batteries? What will happen to the charging infrastructure, which now is at its infancy right now? So these are unknown variables.
Thank you for the.
And of course, it's beyond the purview of the customer. Yes. So if I were to ask you a question, so when you go back to the policymaker, given your research that you've done, what would be your recommendation to attain the eventual welfare gain? Shorten the jargon, whether more emission, less emission. So what would be the policy implication that you would foresee with what you have written?
Thank you for the questions. So the first question where you asked on the middle income trap, I would like to say that when a lot of researchers have gone further and established the EKC-Kuznets hypothesis for different nations, and I cannot say this particularly for developing or developed nations per se. So I think there is a further scope of research to sort of identify the possibility of EKC phenomena when considering the income levels of different nations and whether middle income trap holds or not. And then you also talked about the externalities and the further policy recommendations for attaining the turning point. So what I personally see is, I think it's more of a trend, an intuitive sort of approach, a consumer-oriented approach that enables consumers to make moves towards an emissions-conscious consumption, investment in electric vehicles, and bringing in that an investment in the entire electric vehicles, charging points, and infrastructure of the same. So I think these are certain steps that may accelerate or push us to the turning point. Further measures can also include on the government side, on the inspection side of the vehicles, is pollution inspections, and the entire argument of the N-shaped, inverted N-shaped EKC, which says that there are policy-oriented lags. I think if these things are resolved and if these things are addressed thoroughly and efficient control measures are brought in, then I think there is some possibility of having that inverted U-shaped EKC as desired.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? All right.
Manish, just
yes.
one simple question. You have given certain policy implications, and possibly they have to do something with the governmental action.
Absolutely. So
do you think that the kind of political conditions in which we are living and the behavior of the government agencies, do you think these are feasible kind of things which you have suggested?
So I think it all starts off with what the priority is. I remember in the recent COP26 summit, commitments were made to have zero emissions vehicles by 2040. So if the government is actually having that purview of that they want this emissions control measures, or if they're actually prioritizing emissions at the core, then I think having such steps, the recommended steps towards attaining the turning point, should be consistent with its goals. So if the government is going out there and making such statements, then these are something, implementing these policies are the most apt and wise way ahead. That's what I feel.
Okay.
Well, just to add a point to what Dean Thayil said and you said as a rejoinder. If you see the rollout of the green charging infrastructure, the government has done exactly the opposite. So it is prioritizing green vehicle production over charging, and which would essentially mean more proprietary systems of charging as against a universally interoperable charging network, which probably could have had a larger welfare impact like China has done. So just a perspective.
Thank you. So I'll certainly look into that and add that to my research. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Manish. I would now request Team 6, the monopolist, to please share their presentation.
Could you please confirm if the presentation is visible?
It's visible, right?
All right. Do we just start off?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good evening, respected judges and fellow presenters. We are Team Monopolist from Shriram College of Commerce, and we're going to be presenting our paper titled Decision Paralysis Subject to a Producer's Scrutiny. To give an overview of our presentation and the research paper, we'll start off with the introduction, moving to the problem statement, the literature review, research questions, methodology, findings and analysis, conclusions, limitations and scope, and finally we'll end with the questions and answers session.
Yes. So coming to this concept of what decision paralysis or choice paralysis is. So simply put, it is a phenomenon or a situation that arises when an agent or an economic agent is paralyzed of his ability to make an accurate economic decision. So to put more fairly, more formal of a definition, I would say that decision paralysis occurs when there are too many choices available to the agent, and as a result, he is not able to make the actual choice which he wants to make. The decision-making ability of the agent gets paralyzed. And this is actually going to be becoming a very common phenomenon in the age of globalization, when all of us, all economic agents, are being offered a plethora of different choices for every single product they wish to. So the presence of different choices leads to an overall choice overload. So from the perspective of conventional economic theory, what we've all known about is that irrespective of the number of choices that is given, or irrespective of what is there in front of an agent, the agent does a constraint maximization of his utility given his budget constraint and chooses whatever is best for him. But our understanding of this phenomenon of choice paralysis completely contradicts what is conventionally known, because in fact, the research by Iyengar and Lepper from 2004, which is one of the most first papers that looked into this particular thing, which we'll also be analyzing in a literature review part, actually speaks about how giving so many options to the consumers actually induces the consumer to not to make a choice, or at cases even defer their choice instead of choosing one particular one. So this actually creates some kind of a problem and leads to a inefficiency in the whole economic system. And we are more crucially focused on how this is going to, in fact, affect our producers. Because basically when the business grows, more products are introduced, the business diversifies, and they get more sales. But if the consumer is not able to make a choice and ultimately is not going to buy anything, then it's completely going to be a waste for the producer side also. Therefore, we come to the major objectives what we have for this study. So basically what we wish to look more into in detail is how is this phenomenon of choice paralysis going to impact the producers from the producer side, and how can the producer be appraised of this particular phenomenon so that they can reach a better business strategies, as in the last line what I've written. This can be helpful to segment and curate their strategies and product lines in accordance and mitigate the losses, because basically so we'll be looking at how the producer needs, what all things should the producer know about choice paralysis, and how can the producers revamp themselves into have a better market outcome.
Right. So now moving on to the literature review, here I think it's very essential to pinpoint the fact that that we observed that there was an extreme dearth in research on the phenomenon of choice paralysis or decision paralysis from the perspective of a producer. So after reading a lot on the research papers, the articles, and other such books that were presented on the phenomenon of choice paralysis from the perspective of a consumer, we came up with the conclusion that there was a huge research gap that needed to be bridged from the perspective of a producer. So moving to the literature review, one of the most important papers that was written by Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper in the year 2000, that was titled "When Choice is Demotivating, Can One Desire Too Much of a Good Thing?" So they talked about how having multiple choices or having different numbers of choices could impact the decision making of a consumer. So they've conducted various kinds of experiments in their paper and analyzed how it affected the indecisiveness or the decision-making ability of a consumer. One of the very famous experiments was the jam experiment, which was conducted in a supermarket in California. So just to give a brief about it and just to contextualize, so on a given day, these guys presented, a table with 30 varieties of jams. And on another day, they presented the table with 6 varieties of jams, which could be tested and then could be bought from the supermarket, etc. So it was observed after the experiment was conducted that on the given day, wherein 6 varieties as compared to the 24 or 30 varieties of jams were presented, it attracted 10 times more sales than the higher number of options or choices presented to the consumers. So this is where the phenomena of decision paralysis or choice paralysis actually came up, and people started talking about it. And very after 4 years of this paper, Barry Schwartz wrote a book that is called The Paradox of Choice: Why More is Less. So he talked about how the phenomenon of choice paralysis also affects a person's emotional well-being, by leading to dissatisfaction and delayed responses, etc. But he also, looked at the solution part of it and presented the consumers with a list of tactics that they can probably, adopt in order to tackle the problem of choice paralysis. Thirdly, which is again a paper, an article, in fact, by Barry Schwartz, is called "More Isn't Always Better." So this is kind of an epilogue to his book, which talks about a little more about the producer's perspective, not in great detail, but just hints at how making available too many options cannot be used as a business strategy nowadays, because it actually leads to a loss in sales and actually leading from the consumer not being able to make a choice. And lastly, Alexander Chernev wrote a paper on choice overload, that is a conceptual review and a meta-analysis, wherein he again analyzed 99 choice theories and came to the conclusion that reducing the number of choices offered to consumers will directly impact the sales figures of a firm or a producer. So this was it about the literature review.
Yes, so from our literature review, we are very clearly able to understand that choice paralysis as such is a comparatively newer topic as far as behavioral economics or economic research as a whole is concerned. And two, there is an extreme dearth of analysis from the academia's point of view in how choice paralysis is going to impact the producers. So therefore, we segregate our basic things which we intend to do through this paper into 3 research questions. So what is the phenomenon? And we basically try to understand what analysis paralysis is and what its causes are. Then how is a consumer's choice-making behavior affected because of the fact that he's given with too many choices. And 3, of how is this going to impact the producers, and how can producers also find some ways to abate this issue. So coming to our methodology now. So we have basically tried to present this as a qualitative approach, trying to decrypt and analyze facts through existing researches and existing theories from economics. And we have also analyzed it through past studies from academic papers, media reports, published expert observations, and such existing literature to refer and draw remarks. We have also, and coming to our last point, which is to understand how it's going to have impact the producers, where we could not find sufficient literature. We have tried to explain it by creating a hypothetical example, so that the delivery and analysis becomes much more smoother and effective.
Right. So now moving to the findings and the analysis part of the paper, that is like at the very core of it, we divided the paper into the findings, in fact, into 2 parts. One is about the choice overload and how the consumers react to it. And the second is the choices and how the forms of markets that are there affects the decision-making ability of a consumer and the sales of a producer. So moving to the first part, that is the choice overload and the consumer's reaction. I think it's been made pretty clear that a choice overload leads to decision fatigue of a consumer, wherein there are either of the three responses from the side of a consumer. There's either delayed decision making, there's avoidance of a decision making, or there is choice deferral or a default purchase. So these are some of the responses that a consumer has to decision fatigue or choice overload. Then there are 4 criteria that were again mentioned by Alexander in his paper, them being quick and easy choice. So these are 4 criteria that motivate a consumer to purchase a certain good. So these were quick and easy choice, which again contradicts the fact that there is a choice overload in the market. Second is the product being complex. So I'll discuss more about this in the monopoly example that I take up. The third is the fact that it is when it is easy to compare alternatives, right? So this can be exploited by the firms wherein they can provide comparison charts and the producer can actually compare very easily and hence be able to make a easier decision and a quicker decision. And lastly, when there are no clear preferences of a consumer. So these are 4 criteria that were mentioned by Alexander. Moving to the fact that there is less purchase when there are more choices. So this is taken from a survey study which was done on the topic on online purchases, on online sales of apparels. So it is clearly indicated by the study that when there are more options, it leads to less purchases. And like I previously mentioned, the firms can take advantage of the same by providing comparison charts, rebates, discounts, etc. Now, moving to the thought experiment part of things, that is the forms of markets, etc., which has been discussed in detail in the paper. So there are we took 2 cases, 2 forms of markets, that is a monopoly and a perfect competition market. So for a monopoly, let's assume for simplicity that there is a company that produces juice. Right. So one case can be wherein there are just 2 varieties of juice, let's say. So what we can deductively analyze is that there's an almost equal proportion of sales for both the varieties. And, it's only dependent, the number of sales is only dependent on the prices, the tastes and preferences of the consumers, the income and the number of people that are in the market, etc. So we can easily analyze from this example that there will be little dissatisfaction and very efficient decision making on part of the consumer in case there is a monopoly and there are only 2 varieties of juices that are offered. In the same case, that is in the case of a monopoly, if the monopoly was to offer 30 varieties of juices, we can again analyze that the sales of some juices will be higher than the sales of others, and there will be a delay in the decision making and hence a loss in the overall sales for the producer. Now, moving to the perfect competition thought experiment, we can have 3 cases. That is case of 1 choice, case of too few choices, and too many choices. Again, to hypothetically assume that there's a firm that, let's say, manufactures mobile phones. Now, if the company was to offer only one type of mobile phone, so now here comes the concept of a single choice abortion. So this was given by Mokon in his paper of 2014, wherein he said that a consumer will most likely avoid an attractive option, even if it is better in terms of price, quality, etc., when there is nothing to compare it with. So if there are no alternatives to compare the product with, the consumer will move away from that choice. Given too few choices, again, we can again analyze that since there are multiple firms in the market and the firm is a price taker, and this will lead to the firm having, being in a similar bracket like all other firms, and giving too many choices will again lead the firm to go into losses and not be able to generate a lot of sales. Now, moving to the conclusions, we analyze after the thought experiments and the analysis of choice overload from the perspective of a consumer, that the phenomenon of choice overload or choice analysis leads the consumers into decision fatigue and the producers to lose out on their sales incidentally. So this arises as a problem from both sides, right? And given the fact that there has been a lot of literature from the perspective of a consumer and none from the perspective of a producer, we understand that research on the field and on the theme will lead to more awareness about how a producer should, curate their business strategies so as to expand their sales, and also look at how a consumer is reacting, because this game is entirely of human psychology and human behavior, which isn't very, very,
Matthew, I'm sorry, I'll have to ask you to stop here.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Can I just stop,
Okay, yeah, all right.
Right. So about the just one little point that I would want to make here, which I've already made in the previous slides, is that given that there's not a lot of research on the same, we aim to expand research on the same by writing a paper on the same, and we also understand that it is imperative for the producer segment in order to evaluate the marketing strategies, etc. And we're very sorry for extending and overshooting the time limit, but we're open to take questions now.
I'll request judges to please ask questions.
Okay, interesting topic, Mithali. But my only concern is that you have said that your analysis is based on past studies, media reports. So what is the source? What kind of studies? How many research papers? How many, media reports? I didn't see that data part in your study. And how have you analyzed that? Which qualitative tool you have used?
Right. So, ma'am, to answer your first question as to which kind of papers and which kind of reports that we've used in order to come to this analysis, like I said, that there's a paucity of research on this topic, but we did find a lot of research from the perspective of a consumer. And in my literature review, I just mentioned 4 of the very important, fields of research that have been there. But there's an entire list of researches that have been carried on, and there have been a lot of books as well on the same. But in order to analyze the same from the perspective of a producer, we thought that using the qualitative tool of thought experiments would be the best alternative here, because it is very, it's very deductive when you look at things that way, especially from the point of view of a, market system, which is something that all of us incidentally know. So that is how we looked at our methodology, etc. I'm sorry if I couldn't, if there's something else that you were asking.
Sir, you may ask.
So, you have given a very fascinating kind of analysis of this, and there is a very old kind of a view given by Herbert Simon about bounded rationality. And possibly one of the aspects that they have touched is that, it is the individual cognition, which is a very important factor, because we as individuals have our own limitations and we cannot process the information which is really exposed to the mind. So that is something which is well known. The point is, what is the solution? You have provided some solutions for it. Because if you look at the behavior of the competitors, it is going to be there. You cannot stop it. In another context, Karl Marx said that philosophers have interpreted the world, but the point is to change it. So the point is that you can give a lot of interpretations about why there are so many choices, why this is done and this is bad. It leads to paralysis, or at least to a situation where there's indecisiveness. But the point is how to change it. You have suggested some measures to change it. Do you think that they can also lead to, again, the choice paralysis? Because you prepare the charts, but the chart themselves will be having multiple variables. And again, the customer gets confused. So I think the treatment that you are suggesting is no better than the problem for which you are suggesting. Is that not so?
Thank you so much for your question, sir. And thank you for bringing up the fact that, when there's a condition of choice choice overload, the cognitive intelligence of a person gets disrupted entirely. So that is something that we also noted from our readings and research. And the fact that providing comparison charts, etc., would help to a certain extent. But again, after my personal analysis, what I came to know was this is a problem that can be circumvented from the end of a consumer, more so from the end of a producer. Because when there were multiple tactics, like I said, were presented by Barry Schwartz also in his book. So those had majorly to do with how a consumer should, like we assume the concept of rationality, which isn't true in the real world. So how a consumer should limit their thinking and should, probably try to not get into this cycle of continuously thinking, which leads to a choice paralysis. So personally, I believe that from the side of a producer, it's definitely a long way to go if they were to tackle this problem. But from the point of view of a consumer, it is something that can be decrypted to some extent. Abhiram, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, just one thing what Maithili said. So basically, as what Maithili was, it takes a bit longer time from the producer side to abate this issue. So as like what we can infer from what Iyengar and Lepper have also done. So basically, there needs to be a marking between what is this too many choices and what is the actual number of choices a consumer needs to be given. So like if the case of jam itself, instead of the company giving 20 different jam flavors, if they go back to giving 6 different jam flavors, then they can actually be able to make the consumers choose something from those 6 instead of spending a lot on producing 20 different things and then producers not taking up any of those. If they can give just 6 different flavors and consumer chooses something from that, then the producer can also be better off. So another thing from the producer's point of view that can come is, instead of we need to do a bit more of research on this end and find out what is the actual number of choice, if there can exist a threshold below which number of choices should be given, so that the consumer is able to make a good choice.
Is there an optimal number that you can fix up?
At present, no, sir. But in fact, what Lepper and Iyengar have done is they compared between 20 and 6 and said that 6 is better. So like that, we might be able to reach up a number. But of course, it can vary from industry to industry and firm to firm and nature of the product and everything.
And will all the producers follow that? Because they have to outcompete others.
Yeah, because ultimately that will also boil down to the nature of market in which the producer is functioning also, right?
Okay, good, fascinating topic. No doubt.
Yeah, our pleasure, sir.
Well, definitely fascinating, as Dean Pal said, but you go dangerously close to a command economy, I must say. So that's my first observation. And the second one is, of course, here at the optimal, right? Or if not, then the equilibria would get adjusted to multiple intersections of the demand and supply curves. But now I come to real life examples of 3 industries I have known closely. One is the FMCG, automotive, and your platform economies currently. They all operate on a plethora of choices. So now you may argue that there is spillage or there is redundancy at the producer's end, but the consumer buys based on the choice. So in real economy,
Sir, I think we have lost your voice. You may switch your video.
Against the literature that you repeat what I said. So I mentioned demand and supply would adjust or clear at the intersection, right? So that's the price clearance. And thereafter, automotive, FMCG, and folks like Amazon, they operate on a surfeit of choices. Number one. Number two, if you take the automotive industry, for example, they are at the intersection of economies of scale and scope. If you reduce trim sizes, your aggregate sales fall. Number one data point. Number two data point is that your higher end models end up subsidizing your low margin, lower end models. And in the FMCG sector, Unilever could probably look at a model in which they pare down the number of brands. But as soon as the market realities hit, you get into scenarios of brand extensions. That's a reality. So though I find your work fascinating, but the real life scenario in the market tells a completely different story. So I just wanted to get a perspective of what you guys were thinking in terms of when you wrote the paper. Did you consider realities of the market, number one? Number two, the authors that you cite, they also did a sort of an analysis of various industries and then came to the conclusion that choice, if it's limited, then probably would end up giving a better revenue outcome for the company.
Right. So thank you so much, sir, for your question. First of all, one important thing that I would want to mention here is that when we're talking about platform, sectors or FMCG sector or the automobile sector that you've mentioned, the three sectors, what we note in reality, number one for the platform sector again is there is a delayed response to decision making, which again, as a user of the platform of, let's say, Netflix, I can attest that, when there's an overload of choices, there definitely is a deferral in the decision making ability. When we talk about FMCG, again, it's heavily dependent on other factors of demand, that is the price of goods, the tastes and preferences, the income levels, etc. So even when we can say that the higher end products of an automobile company, let's say, offset the losses in the lower end products, that is a very interesting take on the same, but which that wasn't something that we were trying to imply from our thought experiments, because when we look at how choice overload affects a consumer, it can be in the worst case scenario wherein there is no purchase. It can also be a better scenario than the worst case scenario wherein there is only a deferral in the purchase of a good. So it's not the case that every time there is a choice overload, there is absolutely no sales. But we want to focus on the fact and imply that if there were to be lesser choices, there could be a situation wherein there are more sales. Right. And which is, again, exactly what was interpreted by another survey kind of research, which was done in the late 2000s, wherein it was indirectly implied by looking at the sales of a company and the number of options or choices they give. It was indirectly related. So this was, again, one of the researches that we had read. And we were definitely trying to look at the real world scenario more so, because this is something that contradicts economic theories. So we were definitely trying to look at how things operate in actuality and not just in theory. But if there's something else that so you would want me to touch upon, or Abhiram, if you want to add something to that.
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mathi, and thank you, Abhiram. Thank you so much. I would now request Team 7, the Inventure, to please share their presentation. And also, as we're running short of time, so I would request the judges to please, although it's a very interesting Q&A session, but sorry for that, and just to wind up the Q&A session within 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
All right. Let's get started. Neha, are you guys ready?
Yeah, you can please start.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Neha Srinivas, and I'm accompanied by Manya Dubey and Arya Shankar, who study in grade 11 in Venture Academy alongside me. Passionate about research and driven to learn more about our fields of interest, we're here today presenting our research paper titled Linkages Between Gender Inequality and Climate Change and Their Economic and Socio-Political Consequences. Yes, I know you're probably thinking, how on earth are these two broad phenomena related? We thought
Sorry
that
to
too when we
intervene, Neha.
stumbled.
Sorry to intervene. Can I see your video? Is that possible?
My video is on.
Yes, sir, her video is on. I think all the members.
Okay. I'm not able to see somehow. Okay. Please carry on. Sorry.
No worries. Okay, yeah. So I know you're probably thinking, how on earth are these two broad phenomena related? And we thought that too when we stumbled across this topic. But as we delved deeper into our study, we gained more clarity. In fact, we even came up with a policy to aid rural regions suffering from gender injustice, hindering their productive output and affecting their villages' climatic conditions. But before I get ahead of myself, let me give you a short introduction on how we came across this unconventional topic. Now, initially, we decided to conduct our research in regards to finding out how lack of education and persistent information failure in rural regions contributed to climate change, specifically the usage of harmful, unsustainable means of production of crops. We conducted a pre-survey in Baranavalu in Mysore to add perspective to our topic.
Okay, so Badanavalu is my native village, so access to target population and demand characteristic concerns were not a huge issue. Additionally, all ethical guidelines were followed, with informed consent being taken and confidentiality being maintained. Now, while collectively discussing and evaluating our findings from the pre-survey, we discovered a deeper issue. While information failure was evidently prevalent in the region, an underlying pattern emerged across survey results. Speaking with around 85 farmers in the village, we realized that the gap between male and female farmers hindered growth in all forms. After cross-referencing data from questions, we noticed that women are more likely to participate in fallacious agricultural practices and are more likely to be unaware of other sustainable alternatives.
Now, as we began our formal research on our finalized socio-economic topic, we adopted a mixture of cross-sectional and explanatory design. Our research included the amalgamation of primary and secondary data collection techniques from our sample of 53 women from the village Baranavalu, and our primary focus was to aid in advancing the economic development of that village. Additional methodology that we used included surveys and unstructured interviews conducted there.
Now, livelihoods in rural regions are the crossway of traditional village life and urban modernization. Having had excessive conversations with villagers in Barnavalu, it becomes very important for us to quash traditional misconceptions in Western society about how backward these villages really are. Parents specifically have shown increasing awareness towards empowering their girl children in whatever sense they feel best. Last year, Anjali and Sumitra became the first two girls of the entire village to ever pursue higher education abroad. Despite such advancements, though, there are still shortcomings in the environment of education. There's a lack of awareness and opportunity and cyclical poverty in the region. This, accompanied by generational backward mindsets, shapes girls' and boys' upbringing in different ways. As a consequence, men are exposed to more resources than women. Fortunately, as society evolves, so do these mindsets, but there is still a long way to go before this gap is filled. Today, many women make their livelihoods through menial labor on the farm or in the forest. They learn about nature in a way that no extent of literature study can attain. Beyond this is where obstacles arise. Women lack exposure to opportunities that will stimulate growth. They lack access to appropriate information. They face glass ceilings in terms of coming into positions of power. To be educated would mean that they could optimistically employ their knowledge onto sustainability and overall reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, evidence from the UN Women has shown that communities with higher rates of gender inequality face similar high scores of forest depletion, air pollution, and other measures of environmental degradation. Research also shows that women in positions of power tend to take decisions in favor of sustainability and protecting the environment and tend to ratify more environmentally friendly treaties than men in the same positions.
Okay, so the aforementioned Badanavalu village is a small one with a population of just 2,900 residents. located in the district of Mysore in Karnataka. So we've chosen this village because not only did it allow us to focus our research abilities on a representative subset, it also allowed us to gain more qualitative data from villagers during interviews because of our well-established and pre-existing relationships we had with them. So this led to a foundation of trust, honesty, and fairness accompanying the village's women interaction with us and the analysis conducted throughout our paper.
Now, one of our main objectives was for our work to be currently relevant in today's society. And to make sure that such was the case, we started with a discussion on political relevance. Here, we study the Red Plus initiative established in September of 2008 by the UNFCCC as a framework to guide nations towards sustainable forestry management and to ultimately reduce global GHG emissions. In Nepal, for example, the lack of female involvement in policy making and decision making, despite the participation of grassroots women-led natural resource management NGOs in the meetings, was specifically noted. 0 committees on the district and subnational levels had female leaders. At this point, it becomes extremely vital to assert that the importance of gender inclusivity is inevitable if successful and durable output is to be seen. In our paper, we discuss how fallacious agricultural practices in Badnavalu, due to information failure, specifically towards women, lead to detrimental impacts on the climate.
Now, after analyzing data from the survey and past village records, we discovered that there was a higher rate of illiteracy, specifically in women. Through our interviews, we gauged that they have a severe lack of exposure to learning about sustainable agricultural practices. This is relayed to the 4 main linkages we discuss in our paper. These include the dominance of preference towards cultivating cash crops, the heavy use of fertilizers and pesticides, unplanned borewell drilling, and stubble burning. One consistent trend we noticed was that while women acknowledged climate change and realized that some of their agricultural practices may have a negative influence on their yield in the long run, they lack appropriate information on what their alternatives are. Moreover, due to financial constraints, they also sort of lack the motivation to take the risk to adopt substitute sustainable methods of farming. We also discovered that women play a vital role in farming. However, this is asserted in the sense that they carry a major burden of the work, but remain unexposed to decision-making applications. Information failure is especially prevalent in a highly polluting practice known as stubble burning. It is predicted that 16% of air pollution in the region may be a consequence of this practice. This contributes to lower living standards with more health issues arising, lower quality of agricultural yield, and hence lower profits, higher financial shortcomings, and overall more capital having to be spent as a reactive measure to combat health and business issues. Moreover, this evaluation also goes to show the excessive use of fertilizers to increase yield.
Another economic consequence discussed in the paper is the distribution of wealth, the equitable distribution of wealth to be more specific. Through having given preference to cash crop growth over decades of agricultural involvement, a poverty trap is set upon women, and as a direct link, their families. Essentially, farmers grow cash crops for short-term profit. Over time, their own resources are depleted as a result of depreciation in soil quality, sediment buildup in waterways, and other factors due to cash crop growth. After this, farmers' assets lose value over time. As they become poorer, they seek to gain short-term profits and live day-to-day as compared to highlighting emphasis on long-term gratification. Survey and the interview data indicated that 100% of the subjects in the study support this assertion. Now, unplanned borewell drilling. This is another major issue in the region. As a result of this practice, there is excessive soil erosion and overall rise in the temperature of the region. A more detailed scientific evaluation is carried out in our paper, but the economic consequence of this remains similar to that of cash crop growth. It is important to note, however, that specifically in this process, women are excluded from organization and decision-making votes. Not only that, they're not even remotely related to such projects. The men handle that, subjects in the interview said.
Now, let's move on to our policy. Much of rural India today still focuses on agriculture to earn their living. As referenced before, though women and men play equal parts in the actual farming aspect and undertake equally laborious tasks, men are the decision makers in these roles. Neglecting women means that a ton of potential is wasted, and this hinders productivity growth. Therefore, our policy aims to enrich women from rural areas in terms of skill set and knowledge, and directly induct them into leadership and policing roles and make them farm in a sustainable manner for true inclusive development. A side benefit of the policy and its schemes is that women from rural areas can grow truly independently in a field of their choosing, with a good jumpstart provided by the government in various forms.
The policy integrates the Udyogini scheme and the newly introduced inclusive development as part of the Union Budget 2022. We have named it Mahila Kisan Sashактikaran Yojana. The Udyogini scheme is essentially aimed at helping and empowering women entrepreneurs, whereas the Inclusive Development Scheme aims at sustainable farming practices in India to be a general practice. As discussed in our paper, the Inclusive Development Scheme has no provisions to specifically use women to drive the sustainability movement. The Udyogini scheme, on the other hand, is not fully rounded in terms of providing long-term aid for the enrichment of women, which is why our policy integrates the two schemes to provide equal opportunities for all women to easily grow in their selected fields, monetary benefits to motivate them to use sustainable farming practices and therefore economic development in the long term, and then placing women in significant leadership positions to provide increased opportunities as well as exposure.
It is important to address a few shortcomings of this well-rounded scheme as well. A major one would be the excessive amounts of new provisions of funds which will be needed to be created, along with immense training of existing and new government employees at appropriate levels in the hierarchy to effectively execute the scheme. In a country like India, which still follows an archaic and heavily bureaucratic hierarchical scheme, such a policy has immense exposure to corruption at all levels, as the flow of money is at the core of it all. And therefore, realistically, this scheme may take a while to be effectively implemented, and after it does, it will take monitoring and constant regulation to ensure the consistency of the service and its long-run benefits to its recipients. So we also had Uma Maheshwari, who's the Adhyaksha of the Panchayat in this village, to read out the policy, and she said, and I quote in the translation from Kannada, "We like this policy and believe that this will help women in this area. Although it's an ambitious policy, with proper regulation by government and cooperation from people, the scheme will be highly beneficial only in the long run."
Okay. Now, this topic, hopefully evidently, has been very special to each of us. We share a deeper connection to each aspect researched and discussed here today. However, we would be remiss not to outline the gaps in understanding we still face. There is an inherent need for more primary research across representative subsets and considerations regarding geography and pre-existing weather conditions to be undertaken. This is so that women's vulnerability to climate shock and capacity to cope and rehabilitate are both measured in a more valid manner. Another key element of the research is the exploration of the concept of intersectionality. This is an extremely significant part of inclusivity. It is important to remember that specifically in rural communities, caste and religion-based discrimination is traditionally present. In this case, not only do women in general get the shorter end of the stick, Dalit women end up in more dire circumstances and have access to lesser resources and support as compared to, let's say, Brahmin or Kshatriya women.
Overall, our hypothesis and research are supported through an appropriate standard and evaluation of data collection. In the future, by implementing our policy and allowing for inclusive productivity, we could hopefully see the development of a multiplier effect. This could occur as the newfound increased avenues of employment and exposure, along with the higher levels of education, could aid increased economic development by increasing people employed in the workforce.
In reiterative summary, knowledge and exposure are the greatest competitive advantages. After decades of imbalanced access to resources, these villages need to be put in the driver's seat as they are made available to abundant avenues of opportunities, avenues of guidance and mentorship if need be, and mutual efforts in overcoming language barriers from all parties. Now, in the beginning, we had very linear perspectives towards approaching this issue. Identify cause and effect links was our main strategy. However, after all of the work that we've put in, we realized the complexities of socio-political means inevitably influence economical consequences. Farmers are the lifeline of our economies, and women...
I'm sorry to interrupt, Manya. 15 minutes are done. I would request you to please stop.
Can I just summarize?
It's okay. I think we are already running short of time. Sorry, I cannot allow.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, I would request judges to please ask questions.
So Manya, what is the conclusion of your research?
So the conclusion of our research, our main objective was sustainability. So through our research, we identified that there is a gap between men and women and the exposure they have to a lot of different resources. And this is especially prevalent in rural areas. So our conclusion is we need to create, and hopefully through our policy we can do so, more avenues for such opportunities and exposure so they can lead to sustainability practices.
Okay, thank you.
I have no more questions. I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. Sir, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. Thank you very much.
See, only let me ask just one question which was coming to my mind. If you were to use some kind of, if you were to do some kind of a comparison with other states, do you think your findings would be different?
Okay, so for this specifically, for some of the data, we didn't have specific data for the Badnavalu village. So when we gave you data about stubble burning, how impactful it is, or how unplanned bore drilling, how impactful it is, we looked at other regions and then we extrapolated it in terms of the area of the region and the population, and then we made calculations on how it would, generally affect Badnavalu. And I do think that there'll be a difference because there's also a difference in the climate, global warming levels in different regions. So it is important to consider that.
Okay.
Thank you, Manya, Neha, and Arya Shankar. I would now call next team, which is team 8 from JSS Academy, Priyanka and Ishwarya. Yes, I think your screen is visible and you can start.
We cannot hear you, Priyanka.
Ashwarya, is it possible for you to take over, or I think we cannot hear Priyanka?
Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, I think I'll take over. Priyanka, please share the screen. I mean, just to present the PPT. Yeah, so good evening. I'm Aishwarya and she's my friend, teammate Priyanka. We are from JSS and our topic is modeling facilitators of total quality management in the Indian education sector, which is an integrated Pareto, ISM and MICMAC approach. Next slide. Okay, can I share my screen?
Yes, please. But just keep in mind the time limit.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we will not be able to give you extra time.
Yeah.
So is it visible now?
Yes, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the overview of our presentation. So we'll be starting with introduction, literature review, methodology, objective, analysis, and conclusion. So introduction. The potential benefit of TQM is that it can be applied in education sector, and implementing TQM can help the schools and colleges to provide a better service to the students, that is primary customers, and also develop the institution. TQM approach in education involves influencing all components of the educational system like the organization, management, interpersonal relations, human resources, etc. The principles of TQM can be applied to improve the quality of education in the institution. So coming to the literature review, we have reviewed 20 papers.
Aishwarya, sorry to interrupt, but in case you are changing your slides are not moving. For at least I cannot see your slides. I can still see the first slide.
Oh, okay. I am actually changing.
Okay. Maybe you can then go ahead.
Priyanka, you can try to share again.
Yeah, I will share it again.
Yeah. I think now it's fine.
Now it's changing.
Yeah. So this is our literature review. We have reviewed 20 papers, and we have found out the factors that actually the researchers have considered, and they are quality, mission and vision statement, innovative academic philosophy and method, campus facilities, student focus, long-term strategy and planning, continuous assessment and improvement, research and development, industry institution partnership, top management commitment, recognition and rewards, management commitment and leadership, commitment and teachers training. Now, the methodology involved is that we have used the Google Scholar database, and the keyword given was TQM in education sector. So we found around 131,000 articles, and to filter it out, we have considered education sector only in India. So for that, we got around 27,300 papers, and the study has been timed from 2004 to 2021. That came around 17,100 papers. So we have considered only the highly cited papers for our study. Now, the objective is to identify the factors influencing TQM in educational sector and to analyze them using Pareto chart and Micmac analysis. So this is the Pareto chart that we have plotted. So the 13 facilitators are reduced to 18 facilitators after plotting the Pareto chart. This chart follows the famous 20 to 80% rule, which is known as Pareto's rule. And the facilitators which are identified are quality, mission and vision statement, innovative academic philosophy, philosophy and method, campus facilities, student focus, long-term strategy and planning, continuous assessment and improvement, research and development, and industry and institution partnership. So these 8 facilitators have been used further for the ISM Micmac analysis. Now, ISM Micmac analysis is why we have chosen this particular analysis is because not many papers have been used in the Indian sector on education and TQM. So we found this has a good scope. Hence, in this article, we have used the same to determine the relations between different TQM factors. First, an ISM model has been developed, resulting in strong concept of the relationship of the different TQM factors. Next, the Micmac analysis was used to determine indirect relations between the TQM factors. The primary objective of Micmac analysis is to analyze the driving power and dependence of the variables. Micmac analysis is used to cluster the barriers based on their nature. Like we can see the group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. So the clustering is done based on the driving and dependence power of each barrier.
Now, this analysis is used here in our article to examine the strength of the relationship between driving power and dependence power of the factors that are affecting the TQM in education. Now, coming to results and conclusion, TQM enhances a feeling of confidence and trust and alleviates insecurity and fear among the members of the institution and provides an opportunity for continuous improvement, both the faculty and the students. The important factors we found after plotting the chart are quality, vision, and mission statement. The same 8 factors were found important. So our findings provide the suggestions for identifying factors and developing models for TQM in education, and these factors can be considered for assessing a student's performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka and Aishwarya. I would request judges to please ask questions.
Aishwarya, it's quite an interesting kind of a topic, no doubt about it, particularly because I also belong to the academic community, and I would be interested in my students' welfare and student interest.
Okay.
But you know, there are certain variables that you have taken, which do not talk about the content of that. Say, for example, you are talking about continuous assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can increase the frequency of assessment. You can have a continuous or discrete or less frequent kind of assessment. But the question is, what about the quality of the assessment? How it is designed? What are you testing? How you're testing? That is very important, which is not essentially included by you when you're talking about total quality management. Similarly, you have not included, you have talked about the teacher's training. But what about the teaching methodology, teaching pedagogy? Because that is also very important. I mean, whether it is a one-way kind of a communication which is going on, or it's a kind of an interactive session which is being, conducted by the teacher, that has not been taken into account.
Okay,
similarly, you have not even included anything about what is being taught and what is being studied. Basically the syllabi, the content, whether they are updated or not, whether they are latest or not, whether they are contemporary or not, that has not been included. So, these are important things from the point of view of the quality of learning and the quality of experience. So do you think that you have deliberately, excluded them, or do you think they must be included?
Yeah, sir. Now I feel they must be included.
Okay.
Because these 8 parameters were based on the research literature, right?
Yes, ma'am. From the already researched paper, from the literature review, we've taken these factors.
Oh, fine. Maybe you could have just gone through and come out with a gap.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good work.
Thank you, ma'am.
No question now.
One question, which is, I think the paper is fascinating, but the question is, in your systematic review, did you find TQM being correlated to overall learning outcome?
Yes, sir. TQM actually enhanced the learning outcome of the students. So that is why we are telling it is better to inculcate TQM in majority of the institutions.
Okay, thank you. No.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I would now request Team 9, questioning man sessions, to present their paper.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, can you be a bit louder, Raina?
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, this is better. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'll share my screen. Yes. So is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible, but it's too small. I mean, yeah, you can enlarge it. Yeah, now it's.
Yeah. Yeah. Good evening, esteemed panelists. So I'm Rana Roy from Symbiosis School of Economics, and I'm going to present my paper on the topic, Are we misterming recessions as non-sessions? A study of gendered effects of recessions on unemployment. Moving on to the introduction. According to statistics, men have been struck harder by recessions than women, implying that women are significantly less vulnerable to involuntary separations than men. Intuitively, this doesn't sound right, as it is generally women who are seen as the dispensable assets of business, often called the reserve army of labor, which can be integrated into the labor market during periods of expansion and expelled with contraction. When it comes to gender norms, agreement with the statement when jobs are scarce, males should have a stronger right to work than women stands out as the most obvious explanatory factor of cross-country differences in female employment rates and the gender wage gap. Women's engagement in full-time work has been lower than that of men, broadly owing to two factors: lopsided division of household labor, and B, biological causes unique to women. Empirical research has shown how most women choose to go out of the labor force or opt out of jobs when flexible timings post childbirth. Can you please give me a second?
Yeah, your slides are not changing, Raina.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, but I think you need to share the screen again. Yeah.
Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So major recessions across Nordic countries like Finland economic crisis, Swedish economic recession, and the Great Recession of the United States, Asian financial crisis, bursting of housing and asset bubble of 1980s in Japan, banking crisis of Spain, among many others, have shown that men face higher unemployment rates during periods of financial crisis than women. However, while one might say that women fare better uh, than men in the labor market during recessions, this may be attributable to unfavorable socioeconomic situation. Going to the literature review. Nature of jobs is one of the reasons I have outlined for the same. One significant difference between men and women in the labor market is the participation in part-time and flexible jobs. In previous recessions, part-time work for women had been a source of job growth while full-time work for males had declined, according to Smith. Part-time work, on the other hand, may entail some risks such as reduced income and marginalization within the organizations in terms of protection from seniority requirements, redundancies, etc. According to a study conducted by Martins in 2017, the rise in part-time employment observed during recessions is primarily involuntary, either because business dynamics at the present job are unsatisfactory or because people cannot obtain a full-time job. The second would be theories that are proposed by the previous studies. We can see that there are a lot of theories that the previous studies have suggested, such as the substitution effect or such as the substitution effect or the sex segregation hypothesis. And so I will be highlighting that further in this paper itself. The third being development in socioeconomic structures. Researches by Humphreys in 1988 aligned with prior studies that revealed that women employees' cyclical sensitivity was initially stronger than men's, but fell while men's grew. So now going to the methodology. I have taken a it's a secondary research, and it's a majorly qualitative research. I have taken the case study based approach, and for my paper, all figures and other information were obtained from secondary sources such as the journal papers, government reports, international organization publications. For the study, I have taken I have considered two crises, one being the Korean economic crisis and the second being the US recession, both of which had seen that men were hit harder by unemployment in times of recession. So this is, we can see that the female labor force participation in Korea had fell down significantly in times of the Korean recession. So men's employment had declined by 3.8%, while women's employment rose by 7.1% during the recession, whereas the unemployment rate for men had seen a steeper rise than that for females. One possible explanation to that might be that during the first year of the crisis, the number of labor market non-participants among college-educated women had increased to 31.8%, as they had become discouraged workers, also known as the discouraged worker effect, meaning that they had stopped actively looking for work because they believed that there were none available and thus were not considered unemployed. In 1997 to 1998, the female labor force shrank by 330,000, while the male labor force grew by 120,000. Many homemakers gradually entered the labor to support households given their husbands' reduced earnings, regardless of how low paying or undesirable the job was. This also supports the substitution effect or the added worker effect. Several banks had even compelled the permanent female tellers to leave during the financial crisis and then rehired them as temporary staff. We can see here how the male unemployment rate had seen a steeper rise and a steeper fall compared to that of the female. So now going to the unemployment rates of the US recession, we can see that men had been hit harder than women. So going to the reasons for that, in October, so following the recession, men were more likely than women to be unemployed. In October 2009, the unemployment rate for men was 11.1% according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Having reached a peak at 9% in November 2010, the female unemployment rate was still at least 2 percentage points lower than that of the male rate for more than a year. This was the widest disparity in unemployment rates between men and women since 1970. This disproportionate increase in unemployment for women, according to a paper by Shin and Song in 2010, was caused by two factors: a higher concentration of men in recession-hit sectors, and B, a rise in proportion of men who joined or re-entered the labor force after a period of non-participation, presumably due to the reduction in their household wealth and resources. The higher male unemployment rate following the crisis reflected their predominance in cyclically sensitive good-producing industries like manufacturing and construction, similar to the Korean economic crisis in 1997. This also comes from the sex segregation hypothesis, when there are sex segregations according to the occupations that are available for the men and the women. On contrary to this, the female labor force participation expanded faster than it did before the crisis, accounting for a significant portion of increase in the gender gap in unemployment rate. However, men were more likely to leave unemployment searching for work, while women were more inclined towards leaving unemployment and exiting the labor force. So to sum it up, the Korean economic crisis saw a discouraged unemployment effect. They saw that temporary employment was more prevalent among women, strong discouraged worker effect, and a weak added worker effect was seen in the Korean economic crisis. While in the US economic recession, there was a sex segregation hypothesis. Temporary employment was again more prevalent among women. There was a strong discouraged worker effect and limited support to substitution effect. So My suggestions or recommendations to this would be breaking the walls of occupational sex segregation at workplace by ensuring equal distribution of men and women across hierarchies and sectors. Policies should aim at reviewing and revising equitable pay structures, especially during economic recessions. Policies should also be in place to ensure grievance redressal systems, especially for women. Additionally, transfers to new work locations should be monitored, keeping in mind the safety of the women. Policymakers should strive to provide subsidized foolproof home care services to households with full-time working women. This would encourage more women to consider jobs in general. The scope for further research. Further exploring the underlying causes such as the substitution effect and added worker effect or the buffer hypothesis to be true in the context of these two case studies. Every country has a unique socioeconomic structure, and hence the same effects and hypotheses can also be tested on the context of other recessions across different countries to study their significance. In the end, each of these effects studied in the paper can be analyzed quantitatively through econometric models in different setups to test their significance. Thank you.
Thank you, Raina. I would now request judges to please ask questions.
Okay, Raina, on the recommendations which you have given,
yes,
are these feasible for a country like India?
Okay, so coming to India, as we know that India's labor force participation, female labor force participation is one of the lowest among all Asian countries, according to World Bank as per 2020. I feel that the first recommendation I have given, which is about the occupational sex segregation, to a point is still happening because there are mandatory ratios that are given to the companies to maintain. And I know of some companies which are actually hiring a lot of females in the higher positions because just to adhere to those policies. Secondly, revision of pay structures is I feel still not there in India, but this is a study of recessions, and I feel that it's very specific, not very specific to just recessions, but even otherwise we see huge gender pay gaps here because that is also because of class ceilings. But coming to that, I don't really know. I mean, it's obviously government can take up more rigid policies for it, but till now I don't know how effective they have been.
Oh, fine. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
I have more questions. Thank you.
No questions, Atika.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Raina.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would now request our last team, Team 10, Invention Academy, to share their paper. Raina, I would request you to please stop sharing the screen. Yes, I think you can.
All right.
So is my screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, professors, students, and fellow researchers. We are here today to present our research paper on the impact of teenage consumerism on the global economy. I'm Rashi Parekh.
And I'm Hardik Maheshwari.
And I'm Aditya Jolia.
And we're 11th graders at Invention Academy, and here are our findings.
So firstly, we would like to talk about why we chose the teenagers as the focus group. Now, teenagers make up the world's largest demographic, and they're also the trendsetters with heavy influence in the market. And in the current market, they're like at the foundation. So throughout our research paper, we'll be focusing on why we think so and providing the data, various data to, emphasize on this point. So the focus time period that we have is from 1980 to 2018. So we have prevented taking the time from when COVID has impacted, as that would cause a lot of variation in our data. But we have taken into consideration the pre-1980 period, where we have events like the Industrial Revolution contributing a lot into the idea of consumerism.
Now on to why we felt the topic was important. So we noticed that teenage consumerism has really been on the rise in the past few decades. And this is mainly due to a massive influx of Western media through advertising and television. We also saw that there was an astounding lack of information surrounding the topic. And we saw that there was a peculiar pattern in consumption. We felt that it was our responsibility to educate whoever we could about a topic that frankly is extremely relevant in today's day and age. We're also looking out for teen welfare, and we hope to promote sustainability in the long run.
So coming to our literature.
Okay. I think we lost her voice. Was she saying something?
No, I think she was done, right? Yeah. So coming to the literature review, we answered three main questions, starting with what is consumerism? Now, consumerism is a concept that is evolved from 1776 to where Adam Smith introduced the idea of capitalism through his book of Wealth of Nations. And through that, people started investing more into goods that actually provide a productive outcome, that give them wealth and satisfaction out of it. Now, this led to a massive influx of income and massive influx of money into the economy as people started investing more into different goods and services. And consumerism just give me a second, yeah. Now, this whole concept of consumerism slowly evolved, and teenagers being the slowly evolving in the 1980s. Just give me a second, guys. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Oh, okay. I'm not able to see. Okay. So over time, this consumption had become a trend, and people went on a reckless pursuit of luxury and comfort. Now, amidst this whole thing was the population of teenagers was rising, and we were gaining a leverage on the market. Now, realizing this, the producers, they incentivized to shift their supply into the teenage market. Now, yeah. So the media's role is basically very massive in this, because what happened is there was internet, there's the magazines and various components that come into influencing teenagers. Now, approximately in a year, we have 8,000 ads that are viewed by teenagers only. And by the mid-20s, there are approximately 2 million ads by the time we reach the mid-20s. Now, with so many people watching this, and the entire market was also shifting into technology. Businesses were able to gather data based on teenage consumer patterns and set marketing strategies based on this data. Now, companies realized the importance of shareable data, and there was a wildfire in the news. And the products that were spreading across social platforms and the internet. Now, these advertisements were everywhere. And whether teens discovered it or not, they were being manipulated into becoming marketing agents for businessmen. Now, these ads actually show that teens were not good enough if they did not possess certain products. Psychology had started to work alongside economics. Insecurities among teenagers grew, and so did their consumption of goods.
So we followed a 4-step approach while presenting and developing the research paper. First, we decided our objectives. What do we want to achieve through this research? Which we followed by the methodology. How would we come to the conclusion? And then we gave a walkthrough of the process in the presentation. Then we analyzed our results. What do they mean in terms of a macro and microeconomic standpoint? They may be beneficial in terms of a macroeconomic standpoint, but may not be for the individual. Finally, we gave a conclusion in which we brought all of those points together and finally gave the conclusion as to what all of this actually meant. So our objectives for the paper were to analyze how teenage consumerism affects a particular factor. Most of the research that we found, current research, only focused on the consequence of a particular factor on teenage consumerism. How has this caused the rise in teenage consumerism? How are teenagers responding to this? But we never found a research which showed how teenage consumerism affects a particular factor like, say, GDP or employment. Our second objective was to bring together factors addressed in previously published works, like in point 1, and connect them to gauge whether teenage consumerism is revolutionary for the economy or just another fad. And we also wanted to conclude if this is sustainable for the economy or just another fad, building up on the second point, and to discuss various motives for the stakeholders of teenage consumerism, the businesses, governments, and even to some extent individuals. Right. So the method, now we're going to be talking about the method we followed. Coming to the process, initially we picked teenagers in India as our focus group to see how they've been influenced by teenage media. But as we were researching, we realized that this was a global phenomenon with stakeholders all across the globe. And we could not restrict our research to a certain geographical area. And the reason for this, well, the primary reason for this is that one side of the world, namely the West, has been pushing this trend to other locations and developing countries. And this could mean implications such as teenage expenditure in, say, India does not grow Indian GDP, but does increase global GDP, because most of the money would be flowing out of the country as exports due to Western media and Western products flooding the market in the form of teenage consumers. Can you move on to the next slide? Yeah. No, the one before. Can we go back to the brief? Yeah. Coming to whether this was really a problem, often we think that something is a problem, but it's not actually a problem. We just feel that it's a problem. So to identify if we were really onto something and if this was actually a problem, we sent out 2 unique set of surveys to about 150 people. The survey included people from countries like India, United States, UAE, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Nepal, to name a few. The reason for this was so that we can capture the Western side and the Eastern side of the globe and see the differences noticed in the 2 geographical locations. One survey contained a set of questions that strategically helped us identify whether or not that particular individual was influenced by Western media to practice consumerism more actively. And the second survey just identified these teenage consumerism patterns, like to identify how money is spent, what teenage money is spent on, how it's spent on, etc. This helped us identify whether this was really a problem, and we did identify that this indeed teenage consumerism is a real problem.
All right, so our methodology was primary regression model based. So step 1, we decided that in order to construct the regression model, we need statistics. We gathered empirical data for global GDP and teenage spending from the last approximately 30 years as our time period. Actually, not 30, I would say 40. And after that, we used values of inflation to accurately calculate, and then we cross-checked the values for our predicted GDP, because that was something essential in our regression model analysis. Step 3 was plotting models for real GDP against teenage expenditure and predicted GDP against teenage expenditure, keeping the factors mentioned above in mind. Step 4 was drawing inferences from the change in sign from negative to positive with Pearson's product relation coefficient. Next slide, please. All right, so as you can see, we have our 2 regression models here. Regression model number 1, predicted GDP versus teenage spending. We used values for GDP pre-teenage consumerism, and by using slope analysis, we found more values of the same. And the second model was real GDP versus teenage spending. It's all verified and calculated, and we took into account inflation and recession. Next slide, please. Now, Pearson's coefficient was the main focus of our methodology. So after we collated our findings with the regression model, we found that for the predicted values of GDP, there was a negative correlation of minus 0.0374. And for the actual values of GDP, there was a correlation value of 0.0152. As I mentioned earlier, we drew inferences from the change in sign. The change of the values from negative to positive is really depicted the change brought about by consumerism, teenage consumerism, I should say. And through this, we managed to prove a relationship between teenage consumerism and GDP, the magnitude of the numbers notwithstanding. So result analysis. One section of the paper was focused on sectors of the economy and GDP. As you can see from our findings, the concentration of teenage spending was in sectors which generated mass teenager appeal. But we saw that the main contribution was to the education sector. We saw that there was a creation of university towns, student loan asset-backed securities, and changes in investing patterns.
Yes, so now looking at the employment and income that teenage consumerism has brought us. Now, teenage consumerism, it's created a lot of new employment, but this is not necessarily a cause of celebration. Most of the jobs that are created are not only in the informal sector, but are targeted specifically towards our demographic. Now, rather than just leading into a reduction in unemployment, teenage consumerism pushed a non-employable sector into labor to fund a lifestyle that they didn't know about, that they didn't need to know. So now there is a lack of employment trend data and emergence of new jobs. So for this particular analysis, the time period was restricted to 2000 to 2010. The location was restricted to the United States, owing to the lack of data again. But this is a very accurate representation, owing to the fact that this is the time period we saw a huge rise in teenage consumerism, creating the circular flow of teenage income.
So as teenage consumerism became a thing and more trends were pushed in, teenagers were incentivized to earn money to buy said products by getting jobs. And these wages were used by teenagers to buy the products, which gave these companies cheap labor since most of the teenage jobs were not high paying. Companies created more trends using this increased and cheap labor, which led to more teenagers working to buy these ever increasing trends. And since there are more teenagers working to buy these ever increasing trends, these firms are creating more trends to get more people to buy these trends. And this created a never ending cycle of the circular flow of teenage income.
So looking at the market impact, what has teenage consumerism done to the market? So it is evident that teenage influence has impacted the global economy. Now, we know that the teenager is kind of like a vulnerable group. The products are based on this. There is skincare, there is healthcare, and there are various products that revolve around the idea that teenagers are vulnerable and insecure about their body. Now, the market is also volatile in nature as the trends of consumerism keep shifting and changing. We want to look at something in the long run. As we look at it, teenage consumerism in the long run might change as consumers are becoming aware of how companies are exploiting them, and the product demand changes towards sustainability.
So now we have our conclusions. Something that really stuck with us throughout our research, we thought about sustainability. Yes, marketing strategies, business plans, they're all aiming to create a larger market for teenage consumerism, which admittedly is very profitable for them. But we realize that this may not be the most benevolent solution for the consumers themselves.
And then finally, after in-depth evaluation of all the underlying factors, we came to the conclusion that teenage consumerism is actually just a fad, as it is not sustainable due to the fact that it's built on the exploitation of an unsuspecting group and selling things the consumer didn't know they needed. For example, when we're running out of real land to sell, people are trying to sell virtual land. That's an example of exploitation of an unsuspecting group. It is also important to note, however, that teenage consumerism has indeed had a major impact on the global economy for the better. So from a macroeconomic standpoint, it is beneficial, but from a microeconomic standpoint, it is exploitation.
Aditya, I'll request you to please stop.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, floor is now open for questions from the judges.
Interesting topic. Can you tell me from where did you get the data of GDP last 30 years and teenagers spending? What was the source?
Yeah, okay. So I think for GDP and teenage spending, we had looked, I believe it was called worldometers.info. Yeah. And we had found, we were lucky enough to find inflation weighted values for these statistics as well. So we could ensure accuracy.
Have you given this in your report, the data source?
Yes, we have written it in the bibliography.
Okay.
Rashi, what is this concept of American dream according to you? Because I know something about it, but I would like to know from you because it doesn't fit into your consumerism idea particularly.
To be a very fascinating topic.
Yeah, please, Professor Sen, please continue.
So the American dream was just something that we were trying to showcase as a reason for the emergence of this consumerism, the American dream. Yes, for adults, it is different. You know, you get a house, you get a job, family, all of that. But I think for teenagers, I believe that the American dream would be honestly consumer satisfaction, being able to fit in. And there's a lot of mental like mental health issues that do play into this. I mean, it's pretty complex. That's what I believe.
No. But then if you look at it, you know, along with the consumerism, either in the teenagers or otherwise, you know, you have taken the period from 2000 to 2010, I believe, or 1980 to 2010.
It's 1980 to 2018.
Now, this period has been neoliberalism, basically. And there has been an increase in the debt also. This credit card and all that. So do you think it is really satisfaction or it is more of a dissatisfaction because there is a debt trap?
I can answer that. So we were saying that media, Western media has been flowing into other countries. And we see America as the global leader. We see it as the place we go to live a luxurious life, to live a happy life of satisfaction. And when this media flows into other countries, right? Consumerism is a very active thing in the West. People's savings are very low. And when we see them doing this and we see it in our movies, we feel confident doing that. So the reason we put the American dream is we through movies, we see this perfect life, kids buying cars at the age of 16, them driving, buying all branded clothes, having their own pocket money. And we want that. And we go to foreign countries for that. So because of this flow of Western media, we want that independence, that freedom. And that is basically what we're trying to signify through the American dream when it comes to teenagers. It doesn't, like Rashi mentioned, for adults, it would be a house, a family. But for us, it would be independence, freedom, and liberalization in the country.
Do you think under Indian conditions, teenagers have that much of freedom? Yeah, I can understand American conditions. What about India? Because India, you know, they are not working. Most of the teenagers are not working. And they are basically getting funds from their parents. And therefore, there is a conditioning of the mind from the parents as well. So do you think that it is that kind of autonomy and therefore the comparisons may be fallacious?
So that is slowly creeping into India as well. If you see, at least when you look at the major cities and schools, I think a lot of us are trying to mimic the Western world, right? People are starting to get pocket money. Some kids are starting to get bikes and cars when they turn 18. And we are allowed to buy things that we want. We're allowed to go to the West to study. So if we don't get it in India, we chase it after the age of 18. Or to the people who are able to get it, we get it at the age of 16. Many of us have pocket money, branded clothes, branded shoes. We don't touch anything unbranded. We live a luxurious life. So I think it's slowly creeping its way into third world countries as well, like India. And that is because of the fact that the West is flooding these countries, these developing countries, with their media and exploiting the fact that they don't know they need to support their own industries. They need to be grounded in their own culture. And they're falling into the traps of the Western.
Okay, interesting though, but there are many other questions. I mean, because of the shortage of time, I would not like to ask them. Professor Sen, please.
Thank you so much. My submission is that it is a fascinating topic, but you have used a lot of imprecise categories. And because I worked on the advertising agency side for years and also primarily for American brands, I can tell you that, the assertions that you make in your paper, for example, you say that teens are the largest demographic and high market influence. There is nothing which is an omnibus category, which is the largest demographic. It is all segmented across product categories. It is segmented across income distribution, whether you take the top decile or the low decile, whatever way you cut the data. So, which is a fact. And American marketers or advertising agencies do not create categories separately for teenagers. There is a product, there is a demographic that fits the product, that's how it goes. The other one is that you claim that money is flowing out of India, which is, again, you have to be careful because that's an assertion. If you take a multinational, you segment its financial flows. A large part of the P&L stays within India. Therefore, it accrues to the Indian subsidiary as much as it accrues to the Western headquarters. So my point is, it's a good paper, but you have to be very, very careful in a research paper. Every piece of word that goes into it has to be weighed, and you should not sound like it's an assertion. And for data, you could have easily used advertising agency categorized data to be more precise on that. So just a couple of pointers, having worked both on the research side and on the advertising agency side. Thank you very much.
Is it okay if I can clarify one point?
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was giving money flowing out of India as an example, as when Western companies flood goods into the Indian market. That's not something we mentioned in our research paper. It was simply an example of when Western companies flood their products into third world or Eastern counterparts. And the second thing was when we say teenage consumerism has a hold, teenagers have a hold on consumer trends. The logic behind that is if a company picks a particular demographic of, say, adults, right? They're consumers for a certain amount of time. But when they pick teenagers, they could be consumers for life. We read this in a research paper and we wanted to build upon that. That was the basis as to why we made it like this. That's all. Thank you.
Atika, is there a time? Can I ask just one short question? Hello, Atika?
I think I was on mute. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Just last question, another concept you have used is this perfect person or perfect man or something like that. What is this?
Sorry, could you repeat?
In the beginning, you have used two concepts, American life in relation to the media, American dream and perfect man or something like that. What is that?
So it's perfect life.
Perfect life, yes.
Right.
What is perfect life according to?
So it's similar to like how the American dream was conceptualized. We basically want to say that how we, on the chase to gaining everything, the materialistic culture that is developing, we want to live the perfect life with the materialistic culture around us, right? With purchasing of goods continuously. That is what we meant by perfect life. Again, keeping into consideration the American dream. Like these are terms that that are not defined as of such, but kind of like a broad overview of it.
Okay. We put those words in bracket to signify that we're not taking their actual meaning, but it's just a chase that a lot of people are going towards. Like, for example, a lot of people are chasing money so that they can buy all the wants that they want, but economics does not allow that because there are unlimited wants and limited resources to satisfy that. So we're on a chase.
Sorry to intervene. I just request the judges to give the final score so that so you can continue with this discussion. I just need 2 minutes to collate the results. Okay. And then, yeah. Okay. Thank you. So in case any judge has not given the scores, please do so that I can announce the results in another 2 minutes. Thank you.
I find
think we
interesting topic, no doubt about it, but there are so many things which can be discussed. And that is the beauty of a topic when it becomes, opens up so many ideas, particularly because these are some of the things which are very highly subjective, highly controversial, highly debatable. How do you define a perfect life? In India, in Indian literature and Indian religion, we have been defining perfect life very differently. And if you really link the perfect life only with the material consumption and all that, that is itself is imperfect, to my mind. But anyway, very interesting.
Right,
I must congratulate you for taking up this particular topic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just 2 minutes and I'll just declare the results. Okay, thank you everyone. So I have finally the results. So we have totaled up the scores given by the judges and have taken the average of the scores. And we have 3 winners. I mean, 3 positions for the today's competition. Yeah. Yeah. So the 3rd position goes to team 8, which is from JSS Academy, Priyanka and Ashwarya.
Thank you.
Yeah. Congratulations. Okay, and the 2nd position is team 1, which is Ankit Kumar Singh from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Congratulations, Ankit.
Congratulations, Ankit. I think he's not here. Hey, he's here.
I'm here. Thank you so much.
Okay. And last and not the least, the 1st position is won by team number 5, which is Manish Vaidya from our college, Indian School of Business and Finance.
Congratulations, Manish.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And thank you, ISBF, for providing this opportunity to present my paper and present my working. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would like to announce the breakup for the prizes which you will be receiving. So the 1st position will be given 10,000, 2nd 7,000, and the 3rd position will get 3,000. So thank you so much for your participation, and thank you. A big applause to the judges for sitting across for more than 3 hours and taking out time. And it was really interactive session with lots and lots of questions. And I'm sure that each of the team will be taking so many inputs to improvise on their research. Thank you so much.
And congratulations to all the teams. You all did well.
Yes, that's I endorse that Dr. Aki's view on that. It was very interesting to listen to all of you. Thank you.
Had we had more time, I mean, we could have just continued for another 1 or 2 hours.
Quite right. Thank you, Atika.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
May I leave, Atika?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Atika.
Thank you. Thank you, Siddhartha, and thank you for all the support. That was all much needed, but yeah, finally it was done.
हाँ, finally खत्म हो गया. अभी चलो अभी जर्नल बनाते हैं.
First journal नहीं. Siddhartha, I think we should really get the ISSN number done.
Oh yeah, that's true.
तो वो ईमेल मुझे ढूंढनी पड़ेगी अब तो वो दोबारा हमें रीसॉर्ट करना पड़ेगा. So just let us know, maybe we can sit together and work through it. I think March के बाद, I think 18th March, I think जब तक I think 25th March onwards is a good time for me because अभी तो बहुत extra classes हैं नहीं है. So I think during that exams that are going, I'm quite free and मैं तुम्हारे पीछे पढ़ने वाली हूँ 25th March से.
Sure. Yeah, I think even I can do that because so even I'll be working remotely for the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
My father's unwell, so I'm going to Hyderabad for 2 weeks. I'll be there, but I'll be working every day. ऐसी बात नहीं है.
But yeah, you can finish up all of the work before that.
हाँ, मतलब finish तो कभी
Or maybe
होता
you can just see the point.